Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Being of Revolution. World War III is here. The U.S. and China evacuate their staff from Iran and Israel because the bombs are about to drop. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Y'all. Well, Bill Clinton is testifying today about the Epstein trials, and World War III is here. Salute. Let's get right to the content.
Now from Fox, welcome back. We do want to turn now to some breaking news that came in just a short time ago here. This is a U.S. Embassy Jerusalem post. It reads, on February 27, 2026, the Department of State authorized the departure of non-emergency U.S. government personnel and family members of U.S. government personnel from Mission Israel due to safety risks. In response to security incidents and without advance notice, the U.S. Embassy may further restrict or prohibit U.S. government employees and their family members from traveling to certain areas of Israel, the Old City of Jerusalem, and the West Bank. Persons may wish to consider leaving Israel while commercial flights are available. Once again, this just coming in here a short time ago as the U.S. issues this evacuation advisory in Israel for non-emergency government staff. Now, this coming after Iran and the United States held hours of indirect negotiations just yesterday over Tehran's nuclear program, but walked away without a deal, leaving the danger of another Mideast war on the table as the U.S. has gathered a massive fleet of aircraft and warships in the region. Oman's foreign minister, who mediated the talks in Geneva, said there had been significant progress in the negotiation without elaborating. But just before those talks ended, Iranian state television reported that Tehran was determined to continue enriching uranium, rejected proposals to transfer it abroad, and sought the lifting of international sanctions, indicating it was not prepared to meet President Trump's demands. Trump wants a deal to constrain Iran's nuclear program. Iran also hopes to avert war, but maintains it has the right to enrich uranium and does not want to discuss other issues like its long-range missile program or support for armed groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. We do know that technical talks involving lower-level representatives would continue next week in Vienna, which is the home of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The United Nations atomic watchdog likely would be critical in any deal. To share more on all of this, I do want to turn to one of our Fox News correspondents, Trey Ying.
All right, the latest that we are tracking at this point, China has now urged its citizens to evacuate Iran. In fact, the state media announced that all Chinese citizens should avoid traveling to Iran right now amid the escalating tensions between Tehran and Washington. And all Chinese citizens presently in Iran were asked to evacuate as soon as possible. That's the latest just coming in amid the tensions in West Asia. In fact, China joining that long list of countries that have urged their citizens to leave Iran amid the worsening security situation and amid those tensions. In fact, the U.S. has engaged in a massive military buildup around Iran. We've been telling you about that. This while nuclear talks between the two sides have been taking place. The third round of talks just concluded in Geneva earlier without a deal. And Iran is urging the U.S. to drop its excessive demands in order for a nuclear deal to get finalized. But in the latest, the U.S. has also issued an advisory for its embassy staff in Israel as the possibility of strikes looms large. And amid those tensions, Iran and the U.S. are also set to resume technical level discussions in Vienna next week. So that's the latest coming in at this point, the way things stand. In the latest, China also urging its citizens to leave Iran, given the current situation.
from propaganda in real time. Instead of guessing who to trust, you can see structured verification and analysis behind it. Leave Israel as soon as you can in whichever plane that you can get. The United States has allowed non-essential workers to leave Israel, warning them that there may soon be no commercial flights. Ambassador Mike Huckabee later sent an email to workers, no panic, but those who wish to leave, it is better sooner than later. The embassy may impose additional restrictions on the movement of American workers in the country. The United States has been warning and removing some of its citizens from multiple parts in West Asia. They've done that recently in Lebanon. That took place just a week ago, around a week ago, alongside other countries in the region. But Israel, the country that is supposed to be the safest place, why are they taking people out of Israel? Why are they telling them leave? And if you want to leave, you better do it sooner than later, because soon there are not going to be any commercial flights. Well, Israel, when it attacked Iran, it didn't have any flights. Hardly any flights were going back and forth. As a matter of fact, in the beginning days of the 12-day war, there was nothing. So Israel was stuck. No one could leave, and surely no one wanted to come back anyway. But the bigger problem was no one could leave. Many people wanted to leave. So the Israelis were in a situation where they have to be stuck and face the missiles that are coming from Iran. Now, the Americans who are in Israel, and there are over, 700,000, according to what Huckabee said, dual nationals, they form the majority of the settler colonial squatter establishment in the West Bank anyway. Well, they're going to be facing the same problems if they're not going to leave, because they're going to be stuck. Many airlines are not operating. They ceased their operations some time ago, and they will not be going back to operate in Israel anytime soon. Any tensions, such as the tensions happening now, are only going to lead probably one or two Israeli airlines to be operating from and to the country. And that's also going to be very, very limited. That is not going to be happening on a regular basis whatsoever, depending on the level of attacks. Ben Gurion itself, the major airport, was hit multiple times, and other airports were hit multiple times by multiple parties, by the Palestinian resistance, by Yemen, by Ansarullah. So there's a very big risk there. And the fact that the United States is giving this warning to its citizens inside of Israel proves the point that we reached to. We will reach a point here of almost no return. If the United States is telling the people, leave, and leave to any country you can go to, by the way, and then you can go to Washington. Because one of the warnings that they sent was, get out of the country to any location so long as you can, and then find a trip to Washington, a flight to Washington. But your priority should be is to leave the country as quickly as possible. Now, Huckabee is saying, of course, don't panic. He doesn't want to outright say something's going to happen within the next 24 hours or what have you. But that's the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is that there's a huge deployment happening from the United States in the region, unprecedented movement of more flights coming from Europe towards West Asia, and they are preparing to have a full attack against Iran, an attack that is going to be bigger than the previous attacks. J.D. Vance is saying that, oh yeah, it might actually not be that bad. We're not going to go into war for several years, but also that doesn't mean we're going to be restricted, from having a military attack and what have you, trying to undermine all of this American global terrorism that his president, who was the same president criticizing the previous wars in Iraq and how unjust they were because they were based on baseless accusations, unsubstantiated accusations, lies, to do with WMDs is repeating the same thing now for the sake of a foreign country, but J.D. Vance has nothing to defend that position with, apart from saying, yeah, we might have to kind of have an operation here and there. None of them have moral integrity. None of them have genuine approach against war, against intervention in other countries, let alone for the sake of a genocidal entity. And now, what's happening in Israel? Of course, the United States taking them off. Yesterday, I told you about this pizza order thing, where they're preventing, the Israeli Air Force preventing people from ordering pizzas or fast food deliveries directly to the Kiryat hub so that they're not monitored. Oh, look, there are high levels of orders at night, means they're preparing an operation, something like that. But Israel is giving more signs, more bunkers being prepared. Been speaking about that. And now there is a high level of alertness in the hospitals inside of Israel to prepare for an all-out war against Iran, because they were facing problems during the 12-day war. And they don't want to be in the same situation that they were in during the 12-day war. They're trying to counter some of the issues that they had. Some people were using bunkers or shelters as other things, like as synagogues and what have you. Some of the new municipalities telling them you can't do that. And they want to make sure that in the hospitals they have everything prepared for an all-out war that's about to take place with Iran. Now, from the Iranian perspective, the Iranians are taking a very rational approach towards this whole situation that's happening against them. The deployment of so many forces is intended to apply a lot of pressure on Iran in preparation for an attack against the country, regardless of how long it would take. And typically that applies a lot of pressure on the country itself. Now, this isn't just about the country itself, it's about the neighboring countries too. And some countries are making moves too. One of these countries is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is taking measures now to prepare for problems with supply in relation to the oil in case the United States attacks Iran, which indicates that they're convinced it's about to happen, by the way. And what they've done now is plan to increase the output of oil, because they don't want to be in a situation where they would be restricted in the Hormuz Strait, and that would delay or limit the oil production capabilities and oil export capabilities. We're talking about one of the most important locations for the global economy that will have great implications globally. But again, the people in power in the United States regime are not led by any rational logic here. They're led by a push coming from Israel to force the United States to take action against Iran. They're doing that through blackmail, through pressure, through multiple ways to try and apply pressure on the American President Donald Trump. The fact that the Department of Justice in America redacted some information to do with the Epstein files that links Donald Trump to potentially raping children indicates that the Israelis are putting all of the cards out now. And clearly there are probably some battles happening between them and elements within the United States. Some elements within the United States. This is a huge battle. Because Donald Trump, if Donald Trump is going to be seen as a person who was actually doing all of these atrocities on the Epstein Islands with Jeffrey Epstein, raping children, potentially murdering them too, that's it for him. And the fact that all of this is being pushed now simultaneously with these moves and the talks, all of them indicate that Israel is putting all of the cards on the table now because they want this more than ever before. They want Iran to be attacked. And from their perspective, any delay in this attack, any more rounds of talks between the United States administration and the Iranian side is a huge risk, puts a much bigger risk on this war happening. Actually having a prospect for a deal between the United States and Iran is a disaster for Israel. And I'm talking about Israel all across the political board. Everyone is on the same side when it comes to Iran. They want Iran to be completely taken down. And they're viewing this as the last option, hence why they're trying as much as possible to push for it to begin very quickly. And the moves that are being taken now by the United States could also potentially be due to an Israeli update that Israel will begin the strike rather than the United States of America.
Baghdad. U.S. is evacuating its personnel from Baghdad. What do you think that means? That means we're going to war. Once again, and you know, I draw another cartoon metaphor. Iran is turning out to be Charlie Brown trying to kick the football. You know, Lucy would say, "Oh, Charlie, come on, this time I'm really for sure this time." And Charlie comes running up to kick it. Boom, misses, falls on his ass. We saw this a year ago, April 2025. Witkoff goes in and negotiates, comes out and basically says, yeah, we got a deal that will allow Iran to retain some measure of enrichment. 24 hours later, after he'd gotten the hell beat out of him by the Zionist lobby, he did a complete reversal. Oh, no enrichment whatsoever. If you're going to go into a negotiation, the other side's got to understand that what you say goes, and you can deliver on what you promise. Witkoff can't. They cannot. And I think this is an entire charade that's preparing for, I don't know if it's going to be Sunday or Monday, but the United States is going to attack Iran.
Yeah. Carl, what do you make of it?
I agree with Larry. I will say a couple of things that I think we're not considering, unless perhaps General Kane in his alleged warning to Trump considered it. And that is that we may indeed have the makings of a very serious war here. And I was talking with you beforehand, as you know. I think Scott Ritter made a mistake in his typical Marine, if I may say so, in his assessment of Russia and China's capabilities. Russia and China together have over 100 submarines. Those submarines are some of the most capable submarines in the world, attack and ballistic missile. But I'm talking here mostly about attack, which is about 40 in each fleet. They're superior submarines, the only ones in the world that match them and in some cases outclass them, mostly based on leadership of the skipper of the boat, are ours. All to say that the Northern Arabian Sea, after studying at the Naval War College for 3 years, 2 courses, the Northern Arabian Sea has some of the best convergence zones, temperatures, salinity levels, and so forth to negate both active and passive sonar, which is to say subs can hide there better than any other water on the face of the earth, other than being under the ice in the Arctic or the Antarctic. So you're looking at the possibility of a Russian, even a Chinese. Oh, by the way, did I say that the Chinese have a number of very quiet diesel electric boats, which would have no problem making that distance? people look at me and say, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Go back and look at what we did in the Pacific in World War II. We had 5,000-mile, 2 legs, 10,000-mile total diesel electric submarine patrols. We patrolled all the way to the Formosa Straits, the South China Sea, the Yellow Sea, the Sea of Japan, and we sunk boats there and came home. Tang and Wahoo were incredible at that sort of thing, the two best killers in World War II. So all to say, you can hide in the North Arabian Sea where no one can find you. Not even an attack sub from America can find you. In fact, you can be lying right beside each other and not know it. That's how difficult it is to find a sub in there. So how about I come out there, maybe a Chinese and a Russian boat, maybe I come out there and I spread 6 Wakecombing torpedoes out and kill a U.S. aircraft carrier. And then who knows? Was that an Iranian high-velocity missile or two? Or was that a submarine? I mean, they have the capacity to respond in a way that would be devastating. Not to say that we wouldn't eventually discover or think we had discovered the methodology used, and maybe that would be a bigger war, but don't discount their capability to do things. And I find people all the time discounting submarines. Most lethal weapon on the face of the earth, whether it's a ballistic missile sub with enough nuclear warheads to destroy us, or whether it's an attack sub, which can be quite stealthy, especially in these waters. So this is a lot more complicated, I think, than Scott was presenting it in terms of Russia and China's capacity to do things that initially we wouldn't even know what had been done, except the aircraft carrier was on the bottom of the ocean.
Hey, I missed what did Scott say? Can you just give a Reader's Digest version?
He just kind of, Nima, he was on your show, I think. He just kind of said that he didn't think Russia or China would intervene in any substantial way.
Oh,
and
boy.
He said his hint was that it wasn't in their capability to do so. And I don't believe that at all.
Yeah,
He said no. He said, Larry, in addition to what Colonel just said, he said that no army has the capabilities when it comes to the attack as the United States has. And he said that if the United States goes in, it goes all in, and they're gonna be most devastating that any army on the earth. That's why Russia and China may not intervene and may not,
Yeah, I love Scott like a brother, but
yeah, we all love him. It's not criticizing,
but
Scott.
he's so wrong on this. If for no other reason, and I've had a conversation with a friend who's still active duty and involved with these operations, and his attitude was, why would the Chinese want to help the ragheads? That's essentially what he said. Why would they want to help them? And I said, well, they've developed technologies that are for combat, for defending themselves, and they've never been applied in a real combat environment. So absolutely, they get to test it now in Iran, and they get to test it against the very country that's been threatening them. Yep. Absolutely. Why do you think they've deployed long-range air defense missiles to Iran? Reportedly, they've deployed this advanced 3D radar that can see out to 430 miles from Iran. That is mobile, difficult to detect. The Russians have been providing reportedly S-300, S-400 air defense systems. The importance of Iran now as a critical economic crossroads for both China and Russia as they construct this new world international economic order is Iran's just not some other country out there. I mean, it is a critical crossroads for the future. And that's why both Russia and China have been very active in providing support. And the way that this U.S. force is being portrayed around Iran is very, very misleading. They say, well, we got an armada of ships. We got one friggin' aircraft carrier with 3 destroyers, Tomahawk cruise missiles. But that aircraft carrier and those 3 destroyers very limited capability because they're staying, 1,700 to 1,000 miles offshore. If they go close to shore, because they'll need to do that in order for the F-35Cs that are on both the aircraft carriers to operate, they only got a combat range of 600 miles. So they can fly out 600 miles. They need to be refueled. I don't see any U.S. tankers, KC-135s, flying over Iran and saying, oh, yeah, guys, with the gas stations here. They'll get shot down. So that means they have to be fueled offshore. Well, and you got the same problem with the deployment of the F-35As that are at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia and Mawafaq Salti in Jordan. Again, to get to the border of Iran is about a 700-mile flight for these guys. And then they got another 267 miles to go from the border to get to Tehran. So what we've deployed an impressive number of aircraft, 1/3 of the U.S. Air Force squadrons of F-35s. However, the operational requirements to make them combat effective in a hostile environment. No, I think that's one of the reasons General Kane was saying, this is a lot of risk here. No kidding. This is incredibly complex. And we haven't even begun to count what there's been one map published, which shows about 100 different air defense system radars deployed north to south along that western border. This is madness. This is absolute madness what the United States is getting ready to do.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't have said it as well. Granted, Scott's right in the sense that if we mustered everything we have and slammed it all into Iran, we could do some devastating damage. Meanwhile, Iran would be eliminating the state of Israel. But even saying that, what do you follow up with? Where are the forces you're going to put on the ground to make sure that whatever you did is consolidated and is to your advantage? Where are they? I'll tell you where they are. They're the same place those young men and women on Ford are. They're ready to mutiny in some cases because things have been so damn bad for them. You know, here's a message I got from a sailor this morning. I'm going to read it to you verbatim because it's so true. The USS Gerald Ford has been at sea for 241 days. Her deployment has been extended twice. She is now heading back toward the Middle East for a third time. Sailors are missing funerals, missing births, missing their children's first steps. The ship's sewage system is failing, which we all know about, requiring maintenance calls every single day and acid flushes costing $400,000 each. Crew members are telling reporters they want to quit the Navy. Morale is described in terms that defense journalists have not used since Vietnam. This deployment is on track to reach 11 months. The post-Vietnam record is 294 days, set by Abraham Lincoln during COVID in 2020. The Ford will break it, and she is not coming home. That's where we are with that. That's just one ship. Yes, but it's a capital ship. It's a major ship, and it's necessary for these operations if they're going to be, like Scott was asserting, the full thing we can throw at them. I suspect there are other ships in similar conditions because I know how poorly the Navy's recruiting record lists itself over the past 6-7 years. 40% short in the U.S. Naval Reserve, where a lot of critical assets are, and 10 to 15% in the active force.
Larry, do you feel that they're going to use the aircraft carrier Gerald Ford in an offensive, or they're going to use it to defend Israel?
Oh, no, it's there to defend Israel. I mean, if it's in the Med, it has no offensive capability towards Iran. Because again, let's understand the distances we're talking about. When that F-35 takes off, it can fly for 600 miles and then it's empty. It needs to be refueled. And so you have to calculate in there probably that when it's reached 500 miles, that's when you start refueling. You don't wait till you're on empty. But so the distance from Tel Aviv to Iran, it's about 1,600. It's well over 1,000 miles. So just from the standpoint of could they deliver any attack effectively? Now, if they're carrying, they're also the F-35s can carry what's called a JASSM, and it's an air-guided missile, air-to-ground missile, and it has a effective range around, they say 550, but let's round it down to 500. So that does give the planes a bit of standoff, but they're not taking into account the fact that the S-300 and S-400 are very capable, specifically designed to intercept those kinds of missiles. And in fact, in my understanding, some JASSMs have been used on the battlefield in Ukraine, and Russia has been able to shoot them down. So they're bringing not just theoretical knowledge, but the actual experience in doing this. But let's go back to what Colonel Wilkerson was pointing out. What the hell is the objective? I mean, this isn't, hey, let's just get together and get out and blow shit up. What's the objective? And we've seen, with Operation Rough Rider in Yemen last March, they had one clear objective: establish freedom of navigation so that any ship that sailed into the Red Sea could sail wherever it wanted to go without fear of being attacked. That's a very clear, specific objective. The U.S. failed to achieve it. We failed with 2 aircraft carriers, for God's sake. So, now we're going to transform Iran, which is, 9 times the physical size of Yemen, and with one aircraft carrier that's going to be engaged with offensive operations, just one, and it has to stay far enough offshore so it doesn't get sunk. These guys have watched too many Top Gun movies, is what I think.
Yeah. Another aspect of it that people aren't really considering, Larry suggested this in his earlier remarks. Think 1936 Spain, when people were testing their equipment, especially the Nazis. And think about this when you're thinking about Russia and China. Now, Russia's tested its ground capacity really well in Ukraine, but it hasn't tested its naval capacity to any great degree. It's had some problems with it, submarines and surface boats, but not a lot. And Russia's got, as I said, a pretty formidable submarine fleet. And I dare anybody to tell me that instantly, or even in a week or two, they could tell what had actually sunk U.S. combatants. I dare them. They'll lie and say they can, but they won't be able to. Not unless somebody is videotaping the wake of the torpedo hitting the stern of the carrier or whatever. And they're not going to be able to do that very well, because the torpedoes, most sophisticated, travel very deep and don't show a surface wake and only come up and hit when they're under their target.
Larry, Politico reported that maybe the attack would be an Israeli attack supported by the United States. When it comes to the public opinion in the United States, more than 70% of the people, they don't support a new war in the Middle East against Iran. And how can they change this sort of mindset on the part of the American people? Is that going to be a trick to be used in this war? That the Iranian would obviously fight back, and they're going to hit, the United States and Israel. That's why some people would argue that could be the main goal. Israel going first, Iran attacks, and some people get killed, and then the United States enters a conflict.
No, you can't rule that out. The lies that have been told repeatedly to the American people about Iran they're staggering. They keep insisting, Iran's the #1 sponsor of terrorism. No, it's not. I mean, it's just, that's just a flat out lie. But most Americans believe it. They believe that Iran has been, consistently attacking the United States and ignoring the fact that particularly Iran's military operations in Syria, were directed at the very radical Islamists that ostensibly attacked us on 9/11. And so what should have been a natural alliance between the United States and Iran has been hindered, and it's been hindered by the Zionists. And I do not put it past them to maybe stage an attack on one of the U.S. Ships and have it blamed on Iran, because if the story is told, hey, we were minding our own business and we were attacked out of the blue, therefore let's we got to go destroy Iran. Now the problem with this is the U.S. doesn't have that capability, short of using nuclear weapons. We've already established the limitations of U.S. naval power last March in the Red Sea. And there we had 2 aircraft carriers. You had at least 4 destroyers. You had 1 cruiser. And there may have even been additional ships of those categories. We had air supremacy. I mean, we controlled the air. And with all of that, and we had our exceptional satellite intelligence. And yet with all of that, we had difficulty locating mobile missile launchers, which is why we put MQ-9 Reapers into Yemen to look, because they could find it and then they could shoot. The only problem was the Yemenis got pretty damn good at shooting down our Reapers. They were shooting down 1 a week. Yeah. And that was over almost $250,000 worth of Reapers in the toilet. We saw the chaos of combat where apparently friendly fire, we shot down one of our own F-18s. And then, we never got the full story about the other one that rolled off of an aircraft carrier deck.
Turned too fast.
Yeah.
Turned too fast and in too narrow a rotation because of the Red Sea.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would that be? Huh? See, so, this notion that we've got some great invincibility, as Andrei Martyanov has consistently noted and correctly noted, we haven't won a damn thing since World War II. When we went into Panama and we roughed up the Panamanians and captured Noriega. When I never saw Muhammad Ali strutting around saying, "Hey, I beat up the kid in the wheelchair," but that's us. We like to take care of the weak and those that can't really defend themselves, and then we use that to boost our own reputation.
Yeah. Nima, if I were doing some of the things I used to do for Powell that he used to say he kept me around for, operational out-of-the-box thinking was what he called it. If I were Iran, I would let Israel attack me and then destroy them. And then if the United States came in, only then would I start attacking U.S. assets. But I would take the opportunity. I've been attacked. Israel attacked me to destroy them. I think they could do it in 6 or 7 days. Would we get our act together sufficiently to re-coordinate? Because we probably have to re-coordinate and calibrate what we were going to do, because I don't think I see a plan here. I really don't.
Yeah.
The plan was exquisite for Venezuela for one particular reason, I think. I'm all the time bad-mouthing SOF, Special Operation Forces, but they do their little missions, and I don't mean that in a derisive fashion. I mean, they have little missions. They don't have big, full-blown operational military missions. They do them quite well, quite precisely, and if it all goes on time and goes as planned, then they usually are successful. That's not the way this kind of war is. This is big stuff. And we don't have a record lately of doing big stuff very well. So if I were Iran, I'd do that. I'd go right after Israel. I wouldn't hit a single U.S. or Arab asset until it actually became apparent the U.S. was in it too.
Yeah. Larry, there is a footage that shows a large number of U.S. Air Force refueling tankers that are stationed in Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. How safe is that going to be? Are they going to stay there during the if something happens, or they're gonna move them around?
Well, they believe that the Patriot missile defense and Iron Dome and the THAADs will protect them. Bad assumption. They'll find out that they were wrong. There really is a tendency to grossly underestimate the capabilities of both Iran and Russia and China. You know, the Western arrogance in this regard is just it's completely undeserved. You know, it'd be one thing if we were like repeat Super Bowl champs and we could strut around like, hey, we're pretty damn good because we've won 3 Super Bowls. But you know, when when you look at our failures in Afghanistan, failures in Iraq, failure in Vietnam, it piles up, and uh, so I think Iran is prepared to destroy those air assets. And let's understand, so every one KC-135, my understanding is in a combat environment or situation, they can refuel one tanker can refuel 4 planes before it has to peel off. And again, that's not this isn't a 2 or 3 minute process.
No.
It takes some time to line up, get connected, and get the fuel going. Well, now multiply that times 168 F-35s that have been deployed, at least. And on top of that, 20 F-22s. So we have assembled a massive air force or air capability. But then when you get down to how do they actually carry out the mission? This is not, it's not like the latest version of the Top Gun movie where, Tom Cruise, they're flying in through the mountains of Iran and they're, dropping shit here and there. No, it's not going to be like that. And, I am making some assumptions here. I am assuming that as a result of the events the last June, Iran has learned some important lessons. That the majority of the attacks that took place on ground radars and air defense systems were actually ground attacks from groups that had been infiltrated into Iran. I don't think they've got that problem this time. I think the counterintelligence elements in the Iranian intelligence service have been quite active since last June, and now especially since the protests in early January. So this is, the United States is, we read our own press and convinced ourselves that we're really as good as we claim we are. And then as, Colonel Wilkerson with the letter he read, we always wondered why they called it on this old sailing ships, the poop deck. Well, okay, poop is the French word for deck. So they weren't really defecating on it. But on the U.S. Gerald Ford, they certainly are. So if we can't, if we can't keep a plumbing system working on a $13 billion aircraft carrier, how are we going to do all these other magnificent things that are actually more complex? That's what I don't get.
16 billion now.
Oh, 60. My bad.
Ford's the most expensive boat ever or ship ever built.
Colonel, when it comes to the aircraft carrier Gerald Ford, do you think that what has happened is something structural, something that has happened during the years, or the soldiers on the crews, the crew are not happy with the situation, and you've mentioned 8 months being on, far away from their families, and that's why they're not happy with the whole situation, that they may did this because they want to get back home?
From what I'm hearing, and it's anecdotal, but I think it's pretty sound, it's both. The system is flawed. It should never have been designed and built the way it was for such an enormous floating ship. And you got so many people that I don't think they really put the two things together, the size of the ship and the number of people and the number of times the people would have to urinate or go to the bathroom, whatever. And so they designed a system that is really easily clogged, and at the same time, probably in and of itself is inadequate for the ship, its size and density of population. So I think the sailors took advantage of that, though, and they started stuffing things in it, T-shirts, things like that, because they were sick and tired of no port calls, sick and tired of, if it were a port call, 24 hours and half the crew didn't even get to go. It's probably a little bit of both. I don't know that for sure, but I suspect it's a little bit of both bad design and irritated troops.
Yeah. Larry, it was in the news that the U.S. military most expensive drone, it's called Triton and something like that, it $230 million has reportedly vanished near Iran.
Oh, yeah.
Is that the same case of the Beast of Kandahar or something like that? Or what is the news on that? What is realistic about that? Is that right?
Yeah, no, I think U.S. it was either shot down or the Iranians took control of it.
Yeah,
and they've done that before. I mean, this the Shahed drone is modeled after what was a CIA drone that the Iranians brought down intact back in 2011, 2012. So, when you get into this arena, plagiarism is a good thing. If you can copy off of somebody else, you're not going to get an F from the professor. I know with your students, you'd punish them. But in the field of intelligence and military technology, if you can copy something off of somebody else that's got something great, go for it. Do it.
Yeah, Chinese are great at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting, Nima. I don't know if you saw that movie back there a few years ago that kind of suggested this when the F-35 was still not quite as bad as it looks now. What if they capture the F-35, fly it into a mountain, fly it into the ground, fly it out to sea? I mean, in this movie, there's a suggestion that, and I'm told the Air Force and Lockheed in particular have done something about this, but they actually took over the aircraft and flew it in the movie. And then it came out that it actually could be done from the ground. You take over the aircraft because the system is so sophisticated and so vulnerable in that sense. I'm told they repaired that. They fixed it. They put a patch in, whatever you have to do. But let's suppose, as Larry said, the Iranians have figured out how to do that, how to capture the airplane.
Yeah, and let's note also as well that the Russians, Chinese have pretty advanced. Well, their electronic warfare capabilities far superior to ours. And again, with Russia, it's combat tested. They've tested it under fire, so they bring that expertise to the table as well.
That's something that people are forgetting too, is that Russia's probably the most experienced military in the world now. And you bet that experience, where it's relevant, is being shared with their friends and allies.
Larry, I want to bring up in another argument that Scott said on my podcast, that is, the American army is much more prepared than Russians or Iranians or Chinese, and that's why they may bring some sort of game-changing, operations with the case of Iran. Is that the case? How prepared? How you compare the armies, both of you?
How could he say that? Based on what? I mean, the United States, we've got our experience over the last 25 years has been fighting tribesmen, whether in Iraq or in Afghanistan. So they're not organized armies with a well-defined chain of command, wearing uniforms, with base installations, etc. These are sort of like my ancestors fighting the Brits back in 1776. They're farmers, they're herders, and so we weren't effective against them. I mean, yeah, we could bring in more firepower against guys that were carrying rifles, essentially. But we've shown no experience whatsoever in being able to effectively maneuver against a peer. In fact, the counteroffensive, so-called counteroffensive in Ukraine that was launched in June of 2023 was not the result of Ukrainian planning. That was planned by NATO, U.S. officers. They planned it and executed it, and it failed. And the failure, I mean, this is what I found astonishing. I mean, I don't claim to be von Clausewitz or Sun Tzu, but I do have enough understanding to know that if you're going to launch an offensive, a ground offensive against well-entrenched forces that have, they've got fortifications, they've got interlocking bands of fire, they've got artillery, you damn well better have some air power with you to soften it up along with artillery. And that air power has got to include close air support. They didn't have that at all. They didn't make it a requirement. Oh, this will work out. We'll be at the Sea of, I mean, we saw Petraeus and Hodges and Jack Keane and all these clowns. Oh, we're going to be at the Sea of Azov in August. Didn't happen. So I don't know where Scott gets his, positive assessment from. I haven't, we haven't seen it in terms of the actual performance of the U.S. military.
Yeah. Colonel, the other point Scott brought up is that the conflict, the main problem for the United States would be the sustainability of the conflict. You go all in, then how long can you sustain the intensity of your attacks, which is one of the most important questions right now for any attack, for any planner on the part of the United States. How do you find that?
Well, I have heard, and again, it's anecdotal. Well, in some cases, it's a little better than anecdotal, that one of the reasons Kane, if he did, and I suspect this is probably accurate, that he did, in fact, make some remonstrance to the president about this might not be as easy as you think, was because he had people go out, a team go out and tour what would be not just RTX, Lockheed, Grumman, and other main contractor facilities, but tour what was available. And one of the states he went to in particular was Arkansas, what was available to increase, ramp up production in a timely fashion. And he got a very sour picture. And so when Larry says, or anyone says, we have only a limited supply of Patriots, a limited supply of this, that, and the other thing, and Israel is going to use a lot of those themselves, they're right. What do you do when a week into the war, you ain't got no bullets left?
Yeah. I mean, it's just a simple math problem. And that's why I'm, sort of astonished that our so-called planners failed to comprehend this. So an inbound missile from, say, if Iran fires a missile at Israel or at our bases where we have our forces based in Saudi Arabia or Jordan, that Patriot missile battery or the THAAD, they're going to have to fire a minimum of 2 missiles to deal with one inbound. Well, as we've seen during the 12-day war, Iran doesn't just fire 1 or 2, they fire 50 to 100. Well, okay, just do the math right there. At a minimum, if they're firing 200, you're up 400 Patriot missiles. Oh, so why does that matter? Because annual production of a Patriot missile, not the launcher, but the actual missile, 700 a year. So there, in one day, in one engagement, you'll use up 60% of an annual production in just that one day. What happens if they repeat that for 3 or 4 more days? And the same with the destroyers. They carry 96 cells of these vertical launch systems that are in the deck. I guess, 50 in front and 46 in the back. And once they fire the missile that's loaded in there, the only way they can reload that is they have to go to a port that has a crane and facilities to reload. So all of a sudden, again, I can easily imagine a scenario in which Iran launches 200 drones accompanied by 20 missiles at one of the destroyers. Yeah, and they may shoot most of that down, but when it's over, they're depleted again. And now they've got to sell out back. And if they sell out, the carrier's got to go with them, because the carrier can't stand out there by itself, because it needs those destroyers in theory to defend it. I mean, this isn't complicated stuff, but by God, we've created a Rube Goldberg system of defense. Very expensive, very fragile, that it doesn't work under optimal combat conditions, and it's logistically very, very costly. It's a system designed to make contractors wealthy.
Colonel, how do you feel about the British government? Are they going to be part of the attack? Are they going to, because we've learned from the British fighter jets are coming, or, in Israel, in Cyprus, and all of these news coming out. How do you see the British being part of this, or not? They're not going to get that involved.
I wouldn't be surprised if they did. They're stupid enough to, apparently. They've shown that over Ukraine and other theaters. But I don't think it's going to be decisive in any way. They'll get themselves shot out of the air, too. As Larry was talking, I was going back to a moment we had with Secretary Perry and General Gary Luck on the peninsula in Korea. It was a very heightened tension. Very heightened tension. We thought we were going to war. In fact, when we met with Secretary Perry, this is my Marine Corps War College seminar. When we met with Perry, he essentially said he was very afraid we were going to war. Luck was not quite as tentative about it or as disturbed about it, but he was disturbed. We talked about 1,000 artillery rounds, or 1,000 artillery pieces, howitzers essentially, in the mountains that would come out and get at least 10 rounds off before his F-16s and other ROCAF Air Force assets could get them. And that was a deal, too, that they were going to get all of them at one time. Those rounds would hit Greater Seoul, and you got 250,000 Americans there and so forth. And we finally got everybody to admit that this was a very tenuous situation. Now, I served on the peninsula. I served with the 2nd Infantry Division. I was there when the tree came down, for example. I saw how unready we were for an attack across the DMZ. I saw how unready we were. So we're sitting there talking to them about, okay, let's say their military moves at the same time. They invest Seoul. They pretty much got it burning, destroyed it. And they say, we're finished. You want your capital city back? Or whatever, we'll go to negotiations for it, sort of like we did when the first Korean War ended, or ended in terms of real fighting and went on to talks. People don't think that way. Oh, yes, they do. And maybe you might have a situation like that exist, plus your unreadiness for it. And that's, like I said, I saw unreadiness for it up close and personal. I had to load my Cobra with 2.75 folding fin rockets by landing on top of the ammo dump. That's how unready we were. So that's got to be taken into consideration too. It's got to be taken into consideration, as Larry said, that we haven't done anything like this in a long time. Venezuela, yeah. Afghanistan, yeah. Bombed Libya, yeah. Iraq, Somalia, and a host of others, kind of like the IDF, killing civilians and dropping bombs on people and that sort of thing. We can do that pretty well. This is going to be a real war.
Larry, what do we know about, the Iranians or Chinese maybe being trained during the war in Ukraine? Because we've seen North Koreans in the Kursk region. And how about Iranians and Chinese? Do you think that they were part of, they were participating? I don't know how that was possible to train Iranians and Chinese, because I know I've heard many, in the videos coming out of Russia, in the Russian channels, I've heard Iranians Persian language. Someone is among them talking in Persian, and you can recognize somehow whenever you see a video coming out. What is your understanding of that?
Well, if they have been there, it hasn't been very very large presence, and it could be more sort of familiarization.
I mean,
Look, there's the whether we're talking Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps. If they're not fighting, they're training. So training and the ideal training, if you can get it, would be actual live fire. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me that certain Iranian and or Chinese observers, if nothing else, were there to see how these combat operations took place. Up until a year ago, though, Iran was heavily involved in Syria, fighting against ISIS and al-Nusra and the various radical Sunni groups. But if we step back and look over the last 4 years, and this is the point Colonel Wilkerson made earlier, Russia stands head and shoulders above every other country in the world right now in terms of lessons learned from combat. I would put Ukrainian at number 2, except they've been on the receiving end. They haven't been dishing it out. They've been taking it on the chin. And has Russia's made mistakes. They've made errors. They've learned. I mean, that's the point. They've learned to make quick adjustments on the battlefield based upon the good intelligence that they're getting. They don't sit there and say, "Oh, well, this is not in accordance with the plan. So just because you're a frontline soldier and you're seeing this, we're going to ignore that." No, it's just the opposite. They've been very responsive to what the frontline troops are saying. Hey, this particular drone, it sucks, or here's what we need to do to defend ourselves better. So yeah, those lessons are going to be brought to Iran. But let's recall also, in the early days of Russia's special military operation, Iran played a critical role in supplying drones. And if you think that since that 12-day war, that Iran's been sitting back, not producing thousands of drones, because they do a lot of it, most of it's done underground. I don't think Western intelligence has a clue about what the actual capability of and size of the Iranian missile and drone force is.
I would just add to that, Nima, that if you look at our Civil War, for example, and you look at the messages going back, particularly from the consul in South Carolina to Britain, when Britain was trying to make a decision as to whether or not it threw its weight behind the South, increased and enhanced its cotton situation, and essentially took the position of the South and wound up probably creating 2 countries on the other side of the Atlantic. Not a bad strategy, really. Long story there. But one of the things the consul identifies to the British leadership, the foreign minister and the prime minister at the time, because he was going straight to them, often straight to the prime minister. The foreign minister would get a copy because his position was so important and the decision going to be made was so important. One of the things he reports on sort of anecdotally, but really and very realistically, is the fear that ought to be in every European country's heart. And they had, and confirmed it for the British diplomatically through channels, they had observers on our battlefields. They had observers at Antietam, observers at Gettysburg, observers at Cold Harbor. They were afraid, and he put the fear of God in the British about this too, that million-man army that Grant was in charge of and that was battle-hardened to the max was going to be used elsewhere in the world. Well, we didn't do that. We demobilized and went out to the frontier with a few battalions, and that was about it. But they were scared because of those observers on the battlefield. All to say that Larry's right. There are observers all over these battlefields from other countries trying to learn what's going on, especially technologically and such. So Russia, China, and Iran probably through that triple entente, if you will, are probably as knowledgeable, certainly Russia more than anyone, about modern battle as anyone in the world, including us.
Yeah. Larry, last week
We've had observers on a lot of these fields too, so don't let me discount that.
Yeah, last time we talked, I remember last week we were talking about the vice president of the United States who is trying to do something to go against, these sort of, people who want to attack Iran. Here, I would wonder what is your understanding of the current situation with JD Vance, because it seems that he's turning into one of the most, he says that we're capable of doing, the war the way that we're doing the war is gonna be different and it's gonna be game changing. Here is what JD Vance said.
Been as crystal clear as it could be, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That would be the ultimate military objective if that's the route that he chose. That is, of course, what we're trying to accomplish, as the president said, through the preferred route of diplomacy. But it's very simple. We have to get to a position where Iran, the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, cannot threaten the world with nuclear terrorism. And it's very simple. I think most Americans understand that you can't let the craziest and worst regime in the world have nuclear weapons. That's what the president is accomplishing. That's what the president has set as our goal. He's going to try to accomplish it diplomatically. But as we all know, Bill, the president has a number of other tools at his disposal to ensure this doesn't happen. He's shown a willingness to use them. And I hope the Iranians take it seriously in their negotiations tomorrow, because that's certainly what the president prefers.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I don't know where the term nuclear terrorism. Go ahead.
I'm back in 2002. I was back in 2002 for part of the State of the Union, too. Quote, this is a direct lift from George W. Bush in 2002. We must not allow the world's most dangerous nation to have the world's most dangerous weapons. That was a line in Trump's State of the Union. That's what J.D. Vance just said, too. A little bit more parsing the words, but this is the same thing all over again with regard to creating in the American people's mind the idea that Iran is a threat to the United States. It is not. Yeah. Categorically, it is not.
Yeah, it's just look at the numbers in terms of if we judge a country by either its direct attack or its use of proxies. When it comes to the United States and Iran, the United States at a minimum is responsible for the deaths of at least 300,000 Iranians. Iran, in terms of its actions and proxies, is responsible for the deaths of less than 1,000 Americans. So just the numbers tell the story. J.D. Vance is lying. I don't know if it's out of ignorance or if he's just deliberately ignoring the facts. But Iran is not the number one sponsor of terrorism in the world at all. It's just not. The numbers don't back it up. Sit down and show me the terrorist attacks each year. The groups that have been consistently reported on by the Central Intelligence Agency, and then later by the National Counterterrorism Center and NCTC, they collect and report attacks and casualties. And let's just worry about groups that actually kill people. The groups that have killed more people, 80% of all international terrorist attacks are carried out by Sunni extremists. And Iran is not a part of any of those groups. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is another one. Except we give that guy a hug in the Oval Office and put him in power in Syria. So again, this is so typical. We've seen this before throughout history. As Colonel Wilkerson was noting, we did it to go to war with Iraq in 2003, and now we're doing it to gin up a false justification for going to war with Iran. One of these days, we're going to do it, and it's going to bite us in the ass something terrible. And I don't wish that upon us, but there's a part of me that says, I hope it happens, and it happens soon, so that we will stop this. We will stop this cycle of violence. We're the ones with over 700 military bases scattered around the world. China, Iran, Russia combined, they don't have 15 military bases scattered around the world. We're the ones that have been constantly stirring up wars and killing Syrians, Iraqis, Afghanis, Libyans, Somalians. You know, go down the list. And we could add Cubans to that now too.
If you go down the list of terrorists in the world, according to the definition of terrorism that we've all pretty much signed up to, if you go down that list, the greatest terrorist organization on the face of the earth is the Israeli Defense Force. And who then is the greatest sponsor of terrorism on the face of the earth? The empire, America.
Colonel, one of the main problems, in my opinion, in the eyes of the Israelis, in the eyes of the Netanyahu administration, is the Iranian, after the experience of 12-day war, was that, the missiles can do something that, Iran doesn't need to, have nukes that can hit us with the missiles. That's the main problem right now. That's why Marco Rubio started talking about Iranian missiles. And how realistic is that? Because let's assume that they're talking about nuclear program. Then missiles, who's going to care about, what? Because you have to have some sort of foundation for the argument you have. You cannot go that much far. That makes no sense for your adversary.
Not if you're us. You're talking to the guy who put together the preparations for and then the ultimate execution of the 5 February 2003 presentation to the United Nations. Stupid me. You don't need any evidence. All you need is your rhetoric. J.D. Vance proved that. George W. Bush proved that. Dick Cheney proved that. Condoleezza Rice proved that. A host of people proved it, and we're doing it again. We are proving again that all you need is the word, and you can get enough people to believe you, and you just keep hammering it home. That's how Trump won the presidency. That's how Trump is maintaining a portion of the American people. It's descending every day. I saw the facts yesterday. Boy, it is dropping pretty fast, both approval rating and disapproval rating. But that's how you do it. You lie. You lie through your teeth. Bibi Netanyahu makes a living out of lying through his teeth every day. And by the way, I don't know if you saw that one thing. It's on tape. You can watch it. It's in Hebrew, but the subscripts are pretty good. At the end of his remarks in Hebrew to a group of his gang, he said, and if it doesn't work, they're going to receive the most devastating attack imaginable. Well, what the hell do you think that means? Have you already uploaded the bombs? Have you already moved them to the point of uploading?
Yeah.
When he speaks in Hebrew, Nemo, you need to listen. When he speaks in English, he's dissembling, he's lying, he's cheating, he's stealing. But when he's talking to his buds in Hebrew, he's usually telling what he thinks is the truth.
Larry, here is what Rubio said.
Point you to, however, is that Iran possesses a very large number of ballistic missiles, particularly short-range ballistic missiles that threaten the United States and our bases in the region and our partners in the region. And all of our bases in the UAE, in Qatar, in Bahrain. And they also possess naval assets that threaten shipping and try to threaten the U.S. Navy. So I want everyone to understand that, and beyond just the nuclear program, they possess these conventional weapons that are solely designed to attack America and attack Americans.
God.
He's a good liar.
Oh, my Christ. Narco Marco.
Yeah.
Has he been using some of his own drugs that his relatives were selling on the streets of Miami?
You just picked the template up off of Cuba and put it on Tehran.
Good Lord. Again, who has attacked whom? Has it been, the United States? The way that Marco and these clowns presented is like, we're the United States. We're like We're like some little girl sitting in a park smelling flowers, and these ugly thugs from Iran have come along and tried to rape us. In fact, we're the rapists.
Yeah.
We're the murderer. We're the killers.
Peace, family, salute.
You know, Iran has basically been defending itself. We're the ones that fund, support, train the Mujahideen al-Khalq, and the Mujahideen al-Khalq has carried out. Hey, guys, stop! My dogs are in here going crazy. They've carried out assassinations of a dozen Iranian scientists. Can you imagine what the United States would be doing if Iran was carrying out assassinations of top scientists or financiers here in the United States? I mean, we'd be justifiably outraged. We've been doing that. We assassinated Soleimani, and justify that. So we're the ones that have been using violence against Iran consistently. They do like to commonly blame Iran for the bombing of the Marine installation in Beirut, Lebanon in October of 1983. But Alistair Crook, who was around at the time and is quite familiar with the area, said that that was Amal. That wasn't Hezbollah. That was Amal that did it. Well, that group was founded in 1972. Again, for the math challenged out there, that's 7 years before the rise of the Islamic Republic in Iran, okay? So this group had its own reasons and motives to attack. They didn't need Iran's encouragement or funding or support. So this pattern of propaganda to whip the American people into a froth, so that then we'll get behind a war that we can't win, and that will likely result in some significant losses for us.
And all I got to say, Nima, is Ankara better be deeply concerned, because according to Naftali Bennett, they're next on the list. And you better believe we'll come up with the same rhetoric.
Colonel, just to wrap up this session, if Trump attacks, I think that he's going to attack, but let's see what would be the time, the exact timing of the attack. But how do you see, let's say it goes wrong, it goes in a wrong direction, and it doesn't get that much of what Trump is asking for, is looking for. What would be the repercussions of that outcome for Donald Trump himself?
Well, my estimate, and it's no better than anyone else's probably, but my estimate is that it won't go well for anyone at all. On the Iraq side, the Israel side, the Arab side, others in the region, and us. It won't go good at all. And that'll be the consternation that faces every partner, every participant, and their allies. What do we do now? Because it really has gone sour. And it could do that in any number of ways, the most devastating of which might be Israel going down in the first 5 to 6 days and using a nuclear weapon, which opens an entirely new vista. Question there is, will we all stop, take cognizance of what's happened, and back up, or will we escalate? That's the real problem there, I think. And there are other ways of thinking of escalation than just Israel using more than one nuclear weapon, or maybe Pakistan giving somebody else one, or whatever. There are all kinds of implications to that. It's kind of very much, in my view, like August, when everybody thought, Britain, Germany, Russia, they all thought, France, they thought the war would be over in 6 months. And each of them thought their alliance or entente would be successful. It was the bloodiest war in human history up to that point. This could be the same kind of condition. And I'm not trying to exaggerate. I'm trying to describe the potential for this situation that everyone in it seems to not be considering, except maybe for the Iranians.
Yeah. You know, what we need is a U.S. officer, regardless of whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, that will stand up and say, I must resign my commission. I am not going to be party to an illegal war. The president is taking us to war without an act by Congress. Under our Constitution, The only way we can go to war is if Congress authorizes it. And until such point as if Congress authorizes it, then yep, salute, carry out your orders. But that's not the case here.
Yeah.
And Trump, if he proceeds with this, it's going to be an error of history without precedent, because normally, like even George W. Bush, when he went to war in Iraq, he had 71% of the American people supporting it. But now you got 21% supporting. So when it goes bad, I don't say if it goes bad, it will go bad. When it goes bad, then you look around for who else to blame. There's no other place but the blame to fall on Trump. And that will mark, I believe, the effective end of his presidency. Now, from that standpoint, that'll make the Democrats thrilled. But it's going to come at a terrible cost for the United States. And we can't rule out that with Russian warships and Chinese warships in the area, with Russian and Chinese personnel on the ground in Iran, if the United States proceeds with this attack, the ramifications for it extend beyond Israel and Iran and U.S. relationships. This will destroy any possibility for a negotiated settlement out of Ukraine, because again, it will show that why should Putin waste his time talking to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner?
Yeah,
because here the Iranians are going, "Hey man, we had a great meeting. We're moving positive. We got an option." And before they meet again in Geneva on Monday, the United States very well may attack. And so, well, we had no choice. Well, then why even talk to Witkoff and Kushner? Their words are meaningless. They can't deliver on anything. And then I just saw another news item. The Trump administration is taking steps to take control of Rosneft, one of the Russian oil companies, so that we'll get to control the resources. Yeah, that's a way to promote goodwill with Russia in negotiations.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable what these clowns are doing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the bad news, Johnson.
have its way and find a way to diffuse all this so that nobody has to die? That's the operative question right now. And based on some of the scenes and some of the information coming out, some of the signs, reading the tea leaves, it's not looking very good for peace right now. And we're going to explain to you why throughout the course of the show. And there is nobody better to talk about this than with Alistair Crook. We're welcome to have him back again. He's a former British diplomat and MI6 officer with decades of experience in the Middle East and European security affairs. He's also served as a senior advisor to the European Union and is the founder of the Conflicts Forum, which you can find on Substack. Alistair, welcome back to the show as always.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, listen, I was really grateful that we had you on specifically today, coming right on the heels of this negotiations inside in Switzerland between the United States and Iran. Lot of confusion about what's actually on the table, what the terms were, et cetera. Seems like the United States said they're going to do one thing on the negotiating front. You had the Iranians thinking that they're talking about something different, and we're not sure what's coming out of it. But what can you tell us? Because you were telling us just before we came on the air that you've had some conversations with some of those in Tehran, and from the Iranian perspective, how do they view the talks yesterday?
Well, as you know, there was quite a determined effort to put a positive gloss on the talks. But if you look at what was demanded by the United States side, and the response of the Iranian, I think you can see for yourselves the chance of sort of splitting the difference or getting to a result is fairly low. The Americans demanded the complete dismantling of Fordo, Nantas, and Isfahan, transfer of all enriched uranium to the United States, the ending of all sunset clauses, that refers to the JCPOA clauses, after which Iran, they no longer apply to Iran and they're free to do as they choose. And the demand for zero enrichment, with only the Tehran research reactor allowed to remain enriching and producing nuclear energy. And then finally, that minimal sanctions relief is offered by the American team, with any further release only after full compliance on all of those elements. Well, predictably, Tehran rejected the demands, insisted on the recognition of its right to enrich uranium, rejected zero enrichment, refused to transfer enriched uranium from the territory, and insisted that any agreement must both include recognition of the right to enrich and a significant lifting of all sanctions. Iran completely rejects the notion of indefinite restrictions being imposed on the state. So those, as you can see, the demands from the U.S. side, from the Trump team, are pretty maximalist. They are already formulated, in my view, to obstruct rather than facilitate a diplomatic solution.
What are the view from Tehran? Do they feel like, or just are they coming to believe that the die is cast, that there is going to come a conflict? Do they still think that there is at least a potential negotiated way out?
No, I don't think so. I think that in Iran, there's actually quite a confident mood there, and quite a robust mood, I would describe it. And I don't think, no, they don't think that. I don't think, they are going to make the attempt, they're making the attempt to try and find a solution. But they're not counting on that at all. They don't really expect that. But it's important, both domestically and internationally, that they make the attempt at it. But no, they don't expect that it'll produce a result. I think when I read out those two sets of demands, I think it's fairly clear that it's going to be very difficult to find a solution, particularly a solution that can be presented by President Trump as a win for him, a clear win. Because if it's presented, if it turns out to be some form of limited enrichment, some, if you like, very limited enrichment, it would have to be further than just the reactor, the research reactor in Tehran. That's been around since the 50s. I think it was actually built by the Americans and has been in operation, I think, from 67 or something. Produces isotopes and medicines for cancer. It doesn't produce any energy for industry or any other purpose. It's just a research reactor. And so they reject that entirely. So I think the mood is fairly tough. They are preparing. They feel that they are ready now and prepared. Of course, if the talks go on a bit longer, it gives Iran more time to prepare. It gives the United States more time to get assets into position. The United States continues to move aircraft into position. The ill-fated Gerald Ford is now into position of Israel, I see. So most of these things are continuing. it's not giving a sense of, if you like, a preparedness for sort of the possibility of pulling back. It's still actually the momentum. And I underline that because in all the conflicts I've been involved, you know, the momentum of war, the momentum of logistics of war, you know, once the sort of spring is unwound and starts moving, I mean, everything comes and it's a flow, and it's very hard to pull it back. It's like that famous First World War affair where, you know, all the trains were moving with the weapons of war and the municipalities, and it was on a single track and you couldn't pull them back. And so in a way, I mean, of course, you can get aircraft to come back, but there is this huge momentum. And there is a huge political momentum, which, of course, Iran understands, coming from Netanyahu, from Israel, from Israeli auxiliaries in the United States, their friends and auxiliaries and donors, to push for it, because from the Israeli perspective, and you know, looking through the Hebrew press in these last few days, I mean, you know, for many of them, this is once in a generation.
Yeah, and, you know, and I can certainly corroborate that. Just in my own experience, I've had 2 opportunities to see the momentum of war that you talk about with both Desert Storm, which I was on the ground for, in Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, where I was in the Pentagon helping to prepare the building up of that force. So I have definitely seen that and understand both the political and the military momentum. I want to touch on something here, Gary. This is a little out of order, but since Alistair just mentioned it, I want to go there first. You mentioned about the view from the Israeli side and about the once-in-a-generation opportunity. The guy who's been leading the charge on that has been Naftali Bennett. And yesterday, he went on Fox News to give his current update about his momentum.
The 10 million Israelis living here in Israel, we are the boots on the ground of the free world. We're the ones who will pay the price of any retaliation or something of that sort. But we understand that it's a price that we are willing to pay in order to remove this threat from the world. I also want to point out to American viewers that as of now, Iran is pursuing intercontinental ballistic missiles, which means in simple English, missiles that you can launch from Tehran and will land in New York or Tennessee or California. The only reason a nation develops this sort of thing is it's for nuclear war tip. If Americans don't want to meet those sort of missiles in the New York streets, 9/11, nuclear 9/11, this is the time to act.
So a couple of things I want to point out from that, because I think it's really important. Number one, and I'm actually going to juxtapose this with something else you just said, which I'd like to ask you to expound on a little bit. He's talking about how he views, and this is certainly many in Israel who do, and I've heard from some comments just in the last 24 hours, that they understand that Iran, if this gets into a war, that Iran's missiles are going to get through and it's going to cause damage. And they seem to be okay with that. They have a confidence. You just mentioned that the Iranian side also has a confidence, and they know that American and probably Israeli missiles are going to get through here. First of all, let me ask you, why does the Iranian side have any kind of solidity or confidence that you see?
Okay, but I'll first of all go to the other side of your point, which was in Israel. And it's quite clearly because, as you know, we follow the press and the Hebrew press, which has got a completely different narrative to the English language press. And what Bennett is saying is simply not true. The Israelis are very concerned, ordinary Israelis. The Zionists, the right wing, the ardent supporters of Israel, of course, are all. They have this vision that, that after this, the Middle East, after Iran is removed from the equation, there will be a new Middle East. And as you know, Modi was just there visiting. So they said, there's going to be a new alliance, which will be Israel, India, and a pro-Western Iran fighting radical Islam across the Middle East. And this is the vision that of course, it's fantasy. And completely unrealizable, but I mean, this is what they're to this is the propaganda, and the propaganda has got a huge momentum at the moment.
And let me just ask you, since you brought that topic up there, what is the benefit for India to make this trip to Israel at this time? I mean, I'm sure this was planned a long time ago, but the conditions certainly couldn't be lost on anyone. What is the benefit for India?
Your small business taxes handled. All your unique deductions found. Keep more money in your business and take taxes off your plate with TurboTax Expert Full Service Business.
You are not the problem. The problem is the stress loop he's stuck in. I blamed myself for months, thinking he wasn't attracted to me anymore. Turns out he just needed
Weapons. Israel has promised India weapons. You know, it virtually lost the last war with Pakistan. It's promised it weapons that is not given to anyone else. And so, I mean, India is being bought with weapons effectively more than with anything else. And also, Modi has a strong affinity to Zionism. The Hinduvat sort of ideology, not an ideology, it's not a political process, it's a sort of nationalism, a form of wider nationalism. He has said on not this visit, but previous visits, how akin it is to Zionism. So, I mean, there is a sort of, is a natural affinity there between Modi and Israel. So that's not so unexpected. But effectively, what he's also reflecting is that the whole route that used to exist, that was being planned, the route, the corridor that was going to go through from India to Haifa port in Israel, is now not viable. So he's looking for trying to find some other way of doing this through Syria, which now Israel controls some part of it, to find some sort of corridor for trade in a different way. So I think that's why he's there.
Okay.
But you said culturally, no, the many Israelis are really quite fearful about what's going to come next. They will recall what happened before in the 12-day war, and they know, despite the censorship, what struck them. So they are quite anxious about it.
No, but you said that in Iran they have a silent, I don't remember the exact word you used, but something like they have a confidence, you said, even though they know what's coming, they also know what's coming. Upon what would they base their confidence?
It's a cultural, but it's also about Shiism. Shiism has always had this ability to sustain sacrifice and loss. And the Shia have experienced this over 1,000 years. And so, no, they are much more able to consider and understand the idea of sacrificing one's life for the community, for the people, for the country. Is quite foreign to us, secular Westerners. But this is something that is very prevalent there. At one point, they were warned they weren't to go to the mosque by the Sunni caliphs of the time, were at the penalty of having a finger cut off every time they tried to do so. And they kept going. They had one finger, two finger, then they had their hands cut off, they had the legs cut off, and they were still going to the mosque. They are, they have a different sort of moral outlook, a different metaphysical outlook from Israel or from secular or Western society.
Fascinating. I'm going to come back. I'm going to circle around again to the Shia issue in just a second to explain the bastardization of that in the United States. More on that in a second. But I don't want to leave yet. One of the other things Bennett said here, which because I think is really important, is that he made a big point at the end of that, even to the point of walking over the host when he was trying to move him on to something else. He wanted to say, this is our fight too, America's fight too. It's not just Israel, because there's going to be missiles flying into New York City, into Tennessee, into California. Nuclear 9/11's coming to you if you don't take action now. What do you make of his attempt to tie this to American national security?
Well, this is just, I mean, isn't this a sort of replay of what happened in the Iraq War? And America was told, there were weapons of mass destruction, and, that these, the Scud missiles, I could remember, we were being told could be landed in London in 40 minutes or something like this. And it was all complete bunkum. And I know it was bunkum because I was involved to a certain extent then. But I mean, what he's suggesting is complete nonsense. There is no evidence at all and no intelligence. And I don't know if Tulsi Gabbard has said that specifically. I think she has, or at least her office has said there's no evidence whatsoever of that. Just like there is no evidence that Iran has a nuclear weapon, and no evidence of it preparing for any attack on the United States. Iran has no quarrel with the United States, has never attacked the United States, and is not, if you like, a supporter of terrorism. On the contrary, it has fought against particularly the extremist elements such as ISIS.
Well, now let's just keep going down that path here, because that sounds like a concerted effort among some quarters in Israel and in the United States to paint this picture for the American public, to draw up this real era of fear that you have to be afraid of what Iran's going to do, because they are coming after us with nuclear weapons and everything else. And circling back to the Shia issue, you talked about what the reality of the Shia is and some of the things that it affects within Iran itself. But on our side, you had yesterday morning, from the floor of the United States Senate, Senator Kennedy went out and said this about Shia Islam.
I'm entitled to believe what I want. But the Ayatollah not only thinks that I'm going to hell because I don't agree with his religion, he wants to kill me. He wants to kill Americans and Israelis and anybody who does not believe in his jihad, and drink our blood out of a boot. And he's acted on that. I don't need to tell you, Mr. President. I don't need to tell you. And he has acted on that. And that's not acceptable. The Ayatollah has decided he wants a nuclear war yet. Why should we care? I hear from some of my fellow Americans all the time, why do we need to be involved in Iran? Why should we care? Well, number one, we're not trying to start a war in Iran. The president is trying to end the war in Iran. If the Ayatollah gets a nuclear weapon, he will use it.
Trump, Abbott, Hancock, the conservative team securing the Texas border.
So let's several things I want to talk about there. Let's first of all talk about the one that was the oddest of all that. He says that the Ayatollah wants to drink our blood out of a boot. I have no idea what that's talking about. Do you know anything about that?
No, I think that was the whole speech of his, was absolute rubbish, complete BS. There was no part of it that had any resemblance to truth whatsoever. It is the Ayatollah who has issued the fatwa against, if you like, against nuclear weapons. And don't forget that during the Iran-Iraq war in the 70s and later, when Iraq was given chemical weapons by European countries, and which they used against the Iranians and killed many of them. Many millions were killed or injured by those chemical weapons. Iran did not respond, and did not respond with chemical weapons of their own or nuclear weapons or any weapons of mass destruction, because they feel that is contrary to the ethos of Shia Islam. So this is just a complete and utter nonsense that he's talking. So the Ayatollah, who actually is a very educated and very clever man, just as his predecessor was, a very well learned person. I mean, I studied some of his writings and his works. I mean, he knew Western philosophy almost better than most Western philosophers. And even recent leaders in Iran were world authorities in Western philosophy. In Iran, if you if you study philosophy, you have to study both Western philosophy and Iranian. It is required, so that you do have a proper understanding of where it comes from. So their metaphysics, their whole approach to life is quite contrary to that. They do not engage, and they have no quarrel with the United States.
Okay, so
they are not enemies.
I want to go back to one of the other things that he said there, because this is something that's commonly said in the United States, and that is, now you've already addressed the part that he said, he told an American audience there that the Ayatollah has decided to get a nuclear weapon, despite the fact that contradicts, as you said, what Tulsi Gabbard's testimony was in March of last year and every year prior to that by her predecessors. That's one thing. But then the other thing, that if he says if he gets it, they will use it. This is another thing that's coming up. For them to use it, you would have to understand and accept that that is a suicidal desire, that they want to get this nuclear weapon because they know that if they use it, that there will be a retaliation tenfold on whatever that they would be able to launch out there. But these people are claiming, like Senator Kennedy, that that's what they will do. Ergo, to stop the first strike from happening, because sure, we'll respond, but we'll lose millions of people in wherever this bomb lands, then we have to act now. But my question to you is Shia Islam suicidal?
Absolutely not. There's a vast difference between. Actually, one of my complaints most when I go to Iran, I said, your problem in not understanding the West is because you're too rational and you don't understand that the West is emotive and emotional more than it is rational. And so you sometimes misunderstand the West. And so absolutely not. And the idea that he's made a secret to a decision, there is a fatwa, which is a religious instruction against weapons of mass destruction, which has been issued. If that was changed or altered, then that would be public and it would be proclaimed and everyone would know about it. And he has not changed it. It's been the same. He prohibited any weapons operations from 2003, as American intelligence service have long since said. Since 2003, he's issued an absolute prohibition on weapons. So all of this is just manufactured propaganda that is coming out. We can guess from what quarters that this sort of propaganda comes. And the idea that there's something that he's against, particularly America, or would use it, is not true. They, as I say, during the Iran-Iraq war, they were very restrained. They would not use, if you like, weapons of mass destruction against.
Yeah, I think that's really important. This is not just a theory. This is something there is some actual evidence to see that they have done on a weapon of mass destruction, so that's even more applicable here. Let's look at where the negotiations were. We started off talking about that there was meetings in Switzerland yesterday between the two sides, and now you have the two narratives that are going out that are being talked about here. Interestingly, most of the people in the United States are saying, well, I think that this is, that's the last for negotiations and it's going to be a war here. We'll actually show you some of that in a minute. But there's one guy, actually, a retired General McKenzie, who used to be the Central Command commander, actually thinks that maybe that there is still room for having negotiation. But he said to have a good diplomacy, you need a good fist.
Contact Roberts Air for all your heating and cooling needs.
Iranians are people who count things. For us to have a credible threat against them, you have to bring that in. I actually am not of the opinion that it's necessarily going to be used, but the Iranians are going to look at it. They're going to understand the correlation of forces, is the phrase they would use to describe it. So you need that combat capability there, as also as described, not only to strike Iran, but to be able to defend ourselves against a probable Iranian counterstrike. So all that is very much necessary if we're going to execute these kinds of operations, or more directly, I would say, support the diplomacy that's ongoing with a fist behind it.
I mean, that's your profession. You were a diplomat for decades. Is a good fist necessary for good diplomacy?
No, I would talk. With the Iranians, and I did talk about the nuclear issue with them many years ago. I'm not part of it now, but I talked to the Security Council, members of the Security Council, about it. They were entirely rational, and it was entirely a discussion based on rationality and good sense, and they understood the position. Now, you're talking about, and he's talking about, this Western obsession, which is, deforming the whole of, I believe, American foreign policy with, the only way to get anything is through pressure on Russia, pressure on Putin, pressure. We need more pressure. We need more use of missiles to make people understand. Well, actually, sometimes, it doesn't work, and it just makes people more determined to continue. And Iran does have principles. And that is why one of the biggest movements, one of the biggest parties there, is called the Principalists. And they stand on the principles, and they believe in the principles of the Iranian Revolution. And those principles are still held today by many, many Iranians, because they were based on the idea of social justice for all. So there is a strong support for Iran and for the principles on which it's standing, and there is huge support for the Supreme Leader. You only had to have looked at the Republic Day that they had recently. Millions came out to support the Islamic Republic and to support the person of the Supreme Leader. Whenever he comes out in public, and he's been in some of the crowds there, and you can see him there. You wouldn't recognize him probably, but he's been there. I mean, he's not in hiding. He's at his Husseiniya. He's been going to his Husseiniya on Fridays. He's not hiding, and he's not frightened. He's made it quite clear, that he expects that he may die in this process. And so he's nominated to 3 possible successors to follow him, should he be assassinated. But he takes it very phlegmatically.
Yes, and let's go down that path here, because that's one of the other things. General McKenzie said he didn't think that there was going to be any attack coming. He said didn't necessarily think there was going to be, maybe diplomacy, but that would then require, even for his version to work, that would require Iran to have to give into all those points you made at the beginning of this show here that you say, and according to what the Friday prayers was, I think one of the Ayatollahs at Friday prayers today said that no, we're not going to give in at all on the proxy issue and on the long-range missile issue. It's just on this limited band of nuclear. That would almost imply then that we're at a diplomatic impasse and that there is no process to go forward. So first of all, just on that narrow point, do you see any possibility with all this firepower that would be enough to coerce Iran with this big fist to give in on these other issues diplomatically?
No, I don't. And first of all, as I said to you, I'm pretty sure of this, that the Iranians are not about to make any substantive concessions beyond what I've just said to you. They will not accept any of those demands of the United States, and they're not about to change that. They will continue to make their case for a very limited, if you like, enrichment, and they will stand on the principle that they have a right under the nuclear NPT, the Proliferation Treaty, to enrich. Peaceful enrichment is written into the treaty, and they will stand by that. When they look at this great force, look, you're a military person, I'm not. But I think most of the Iranians who are really very adept at all of this understands what they are facing and are confident in it, because they understand that actually that those vessels off the Persian Gulf are quite vulnerable. They're vulnerable to many of the tactics that the Iranians have. I think I've mentioned it once or twice before, but I mean, that whole cliff is honeycombed with ship to shore, shore to ship missiles. They have advanced anti-ship missiles all along that coastline, dug deep into the tunnels in the coastline. They have air defenses which were never tested. There are two great lies that underlie, where we are at the moment. One deceit was that all of those Nantas, Isfahan were destroyed. They were not destroyed by Trump in his. It was during the 12-day war. And the other one is that the Israelis destroyed Iran's nuclear missiles. It's not nuclear, it's their missile armaments, and destroyed their air defenses. That is not true. The air defenses they destroyed were by sabotage. They sent small cells across the border, mostly from the Kurdish area, from Kermanshah province, and they had with them small attack drones and, believe it or not, anti-tank missiles. And they got as close as they could to the first radar protection of the Iranians, and they attacked those. And for a time, it caused confusion to Iran because they didn't know where this attack was coming from. It was coming from small groups on the ground. And they solved it entirely by cutting off the internet, which made that these small cells lost their targeting data coming from the American battlescape system, that was satellite battlescape system that was feeding details of radar systems and where they're moving. Now they've changed it a lot, and now they have much more advanced radars and radars that can pick up stealth aircraft. So I think,
and I want to get on that here because that's a really important point to make about what could be coming next. I just showed you McKenzie. He thinks that maybe a good fist will still have a chance for diplomatic. But there was a retired Admiral Winfield who made this comment here just before the talk yesterday, where he says if it doesn't come out to a good outcome, and it doesn't appear that it did in terms of anybody agreeing to anything, he says this is his warning.
He's assembled an amazing amount of force in the region that cannot stay there forever. I think that this Thursday is going to be a critical point where there's a meeting in Geneva between the U.S. and Iranian side. If Iran doesn't produce something really meaningful that Donald Trump can seize on as a victory, and it doesn't have to be everything, because Donald Trump never always gets everything he wants, but he gets a lot. If they come through at the table on Thursday, then this crisis could easily simmer back down. But if they don't, there's a very good chance that we could see some action over the weekend, I think.
So that's what he thinks. It could come over the weekend. Now, that presents the Trump administration a real problem. If he doesn't come up with a diplomatic breakthrough, the American people, by several recent polls, are strongly against the kinetic use of force against Iran to try and get this thing solved. Big time again. So if he has this war of choice just because he didn't get the diplomatic end he want, despite all the efforts of Naftali Bennett and Lindsey Graham and several of these others, people are against this, and so he would have to risk diplomatic problems at home. So now then, according to a Political article here a couple of days ago, there is some talk that, hey, you know what would be great? What if we had the Israelis actually start the conflict and then kind of drew us in there? Because then Iran would retaliate against Americans in the region, hit some of our bases, maybe our ships, maybe knock some planes down, and then we would have to go in, and then the American public would support that. Now, there is, and I'm looking at it right here on my phone here. Somebody just posted this to X, and they literally have some videos. Somebody was flying out of Ben Gurion Airport, and they said there are 20 Boeing KC-135 refueling aircrafts on the ground in Tel Aviv. And there are a whole squadron of F-22s that are reported to have been there, I think, yesterday. So it looks like a lot of American combat power and those refueling tankers on the ground in Israel, which might seem that maybe Israel is going to be the one to initiate this. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, the F-22s are not at Ben Gurion. They're in another airport, military airport. And it's true, a squadron of, I think you call them weasels or whatever.
Wild weasels,
F-22s are wild weasels are there. These are the aircraft that are to suppress air defenses and to create an open path for attack aircraft to come in. Yes, they're there. And those refueling aircraft are there. But these refueling aircraft that everyone is attaching information reflect something important. They reflect the fact that the Israelis and the Americans are having to put their aircraft really far away from Iran. It's now their main base. They've largely evacuated Al Udeid base of aircraft, and they're putting them all in Jordan. And that means that actually for F-35s, look, I'm not a military expert, you are, but the F-35, especially if they're in stealth mode, I mean, don't have a very long period in flight. And that means that they will have to be refueled almost as they come into Iran. This will all give Iran a good opportunity to prepare their air defenses. And as I say, I think you will find that the radar systems that Iran has and will be using will be capable of seeing stealth aircraft. They were before, by the way, the Iranians own one. I remember very well that actually during that June period, there was a planned attack on Iran, and that the pilots were calling in, and it was, I know because it was sort of going live over the Israeli radio and saying, look, we've been locked onto by some unknown radar, and we're not going to be able to go into Iranian airspace. I think things like that will occur again. And the high proportion of, why would they send, a whole squadron of F-22 air defense suppressing aircraft there if they thought there were no air defenses? I mean, they wouldn't have bothered to do that. So clearly they are worried about that, and rightly so. They did not enter airspace during those 12-day war. They actually were all the missiles were fired from standoff positions in Syria and Azerbaijan. So they didn't actually get into Iran during that period. So the Iranians are looking, first of all, at the flotilla, the armada, as it's called, of sea, which is now pushed far back from the coast because of their worry about the missiles. They recall what happened in Yemen, when also there were two carriers in the position and had to leave because they were struck by a missile and had to withdraw. And so they're not, they're not sitting there trembling at all at the site, and they have some responses to offer. And I would suggest to you, I mean, maybe we will find out in due course. I would suggest that actually the responses are going to give something of a surprise.
So let me ask you a question here. There's a lot of information out released, not threats or not neither threats nor rumors, but the Chinese have been releasing more and more satellite imagery of American military assets in the region. To include here, 3 hours ago, they released satellite shows US F-22 Raptors moving around at the Israeli Ovda, I believe it's pronounced, airbase.
That's right. That's where
what
they're
do you make of this? That the Chinese are providing it publicly intelligence. This is not what they're given to them through intel, but they're providing it publicly to say we're showing people where this are. What does that tell you about what might be happening behind the scenes?
What it tells you is that actually, and I mentioned it on this program to you before, is that the Chinese are effectively have been giving Iran the Baidu system. That was the system Link 17 that was used by Pakistan against India and was very effective. If you remember, it shot down many Rafale jets of India. And they've given them, in the terms of their partnership agreement, the most advanced military standard, data protection. And they have the satellites. The Chinese are telling you, it's quite clearly, do you think they're putting all these photographs of the F-22s, the Weasels, and the refueling aircraft up there just for fun? They're sending you a signal to say, look, we have our satellites. They have an intelligence boat just off the shore of the Gulf, which is both jammed with intercept equipment. It's also capable of mapping undersea, so detecting submarines. And it is linked into the Baidu system, which gives them, like you have with ISR, this was your biggest gift to the Ukrainians, was not, Patriot missiles, it was ISR. And so I think you may be surprised. I don't know. I can't say that it's definitely there. But what I think those images are a message to say, we will know. And what's more, I think you'll find that the Iranians will know as soon as you start the preparations for an attack. They will see people loading, if you like, the bombs on aircraft. And that might be the trigger and the start of the conflict. Not waiting to be attacked, but actually the moment that it is clear that the decision to attack has been taken by Washington.
And let me show people why that's a big of a risk. This is from the Institute for the Study of War, and you see here on the map here the ranges of many of the different kinds of short range ballistic missiles, and you see a lot of this goes all the way into Israel, especially those on the outside of their band here. But even as you get closer, some of these American bases in Iraq, for example, in Qatar, are in range already of multiple rounds, multiple types of these. Some of our I don't know if we still have anything in Syria or not. There's been some reports we move those around. But if what you say is correct, and Iran says, hey, you know what? As soon as with China's help or whatever help, we see here comes the Air Armada, they're going to start firing. I mean, look at all of these things that are in the range of the range of ballistic missiles, especially before anything gets taken out. That could be a real problem for our side.
Well, I repeat to you, as soon as there is an attack, this talk about a limited attack, it just is not workable, because the Iranians have said, and they're very clear about it, any attack by America or Israel, it's all-out war. And they will attack American bases and Israel at the same time. If they are attacked, then you have to expect they will attack US bases and US economic targets as well in that region. And also you will find, I suspect, that particularly from some places, there will be others joining the conflict at that point. Iraq, there will be from Iraq attacks and also from Yemen, and maybe from other places, maybe from Lebanon, maybe from other places too. So it will be a much wider war. It won't be just
Well, and
if you like,
that is a real
against-
problem. A couple of things that Gary was showing earlier in this, I want to ask you about right now, because that is really, really important for especially our American audience to really understand here. Gary showed you a sign earlier, or a headline earlier, that on the Washington Post yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance was saying, hey, there is no possibility that we're going to get into a drawn-out war here, because he knows diplomatic or domestically that is like poison to the administration. So they don't want to get that. So he has signaled, we're definitely not going to do that. If anything, we're probably talking about some pinpoint things. You just talked about how Iran doesn't view anything as pinpoint. One strike equals everything is for them. You also had, Gary was also showing you some of the videos where you have these underground cities, these missile cities, where they have all kinds of drones, production capacities, etc., that they can survive a whole lot of bombs coming in from the United States, even whatever gets through their air defense systems, however good they may be. And it seems to me that Iran is taking this as saying, hey, listen, I see that they probably already knew this because you said they studied us before. But now then you have Vice President Vance saying, we can't get into a long drawn-out war. Does this say, to me, that was a big mistake to signal that publicly to an American audience, because you could get drawn into that very thing. And that gives motivation and incentive to the Iranian side to make sure you get into a long drawn-out war to potentially lose. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, they're really making the best of a bad job, because I'm sure you've seen, as everyone in Iran has, who's involved has seen it, the Financial Times articles quoting Israeli intelligence saying that at most the United States will be able to maintain intensive air attacks into Iran for 4 to 5 days, an absolute outside limit a week if they were less intense. So, I mean, it's presented as a sort of another alternative, as if this is this is a sort of choice. It's not a choice. And from the beginning, the Iranians have based their intelligence and understanding is that America military tactics are sort of shoot and scoot. You fire and then you go. And that the shock and awe that lasts a little while and then it collapses, and it's the long attrition that is possible. So if you get out a map and you look at Iran, look at the size of it. It is the size of Western Europe. It's huge. Compare it with Israel. You can cross Israel in 40 minutes by car. It's tiny. Population, its Jewish population is about 7 million, 90 plus million in Iran. And their missile cities that you just presented and you showed are dispersed across the whole of that territory. It's like the whole of Western Europe separate, and they are all both autonomous and able to operate even if they lose command and control structures. They have plans to continue. Each of those 57 units is capable of making their own decisions. The missiles are fired from underground, not through mobile missile firing. This is the deterrence, and they've always believed, that the answer to an American attack is slow attrition. I saw the same when I was in Lebanon during the war, 2006 war. And everyone said, oh, it'll be over in 3 days, it's done. I mean, how can, Hezbollah, a movement, stand up against, the best army in the Middle East, Israel? It's impossible. They will be destroyed. And in fact, it ended with Israel asking for the ceasefire that was translated into Resolution 1701 after 35 days of attacks. And the Israelis were admitting they'd run out of targets and they were running out of munitions at the same time. So, in all my experience, which is, I know, not the same as your experience, but all my experience is that as soon as a war starts, all the plans evaporate within 24 hours. Everyone who said the war is going to be lasting this many days and that and so on Don't believe them, because it's never like that. And what's more, there will always be surprises, I believe, in conflict. That's why I don't make a definite prediction what is going to happen. We don't know what is going to happen, but I do expect the unexpected. There will be the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns.
We actually had a phrase in the Army that no plan survives first contact. That's what we assumed. We literally did all of these detailed plannings with the understanding that they would all go to crap. So you had to be able to be flexible off of it.
Exactly.
But now here there is another interesting idea that's floated by a lot of people in the United States, because many people have said, listen, we see that bounce of power. We understand that's missile cities. We understand the underground bunkers and all that kind of thing. So we know they can sustain some stuff, but this is what they seem to be pinning their hope on. The regime has never been as weak as it is right now. It's a house of cards, and if you push hard enough, it's going to fall. And there's one guy who has a really keen idea on this, and that is Senator Ted Cruz, who suggests maybe we arm the protesters.
What I've urged the president, do not miss this opportunity. If the Ayatollah is removed from power, it will make America much safer. This is the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world. The Iranian regime is responsible for murdering hundreds of American servicemen and women. They fund terrorists all over the world. And so what I've urged the president is, number one, support the protesters and the protesters. Let the people of Iran, give them the ability to overthrow their government. And number two, I think there's a very real possibility we will see, potentially in a matter of days, limited strikes. What we're not going to see is boots on the ground.
Are you sure your tax expert is right for you? Switch to TurboTax Full Service. You'll be matched with a TurboTax.
So we don't want our boots on the ground. We want Iranian boots on the ground. And hey, you guys come up, we'll give you some rifles. Is that a viable path?
He obviously just doesn't follow what's been going on, because this was the uprising that the CIA and the Western Intelligence Service were stimulating in Iran, which failed. It didn't bring down the state. I mean, the so-called protests, most of these had come in from overseas, came in from the MEK, Mujahid Khalq, had come in from Armenia. They were armed and provided with weapons. Some were smuggled in. The uprising was an attempt to bring down, and it was based on this theory again, Iran is a house of cards, it'll all collapse, one puff and it'll fall. And look what happened. And even the Israelis admit that actually their attempt, to foster an uprising had failed. They said, where were the defections from the political class? Where were the defections from the army, from the IRGC, from the Basij militia? We didn't see that. It didn't come. In fact, the people rallied around them and rallied against these protesters who used extreme violence. I mean, they've been trained, and they trained in a way to create the sort of convey on television the idea of if you like, a state that is wobbling like a sort of big building on fire, everyone running for the exits and going out, and it never happened. And the Israelis themselves and their intelligence assesses that it was never realistic, that this was never going to happen on this recent attack during the protests in January. That was never going to happen, perhaps never would happen, because the government, the structure of the state was intact. So I think that, he ought to actually, go and examine what's happened. Do some due diligence. Why don't you do some really concerted work to understand what's happened there and what the situation is, instead of sort of spouting out these ideas that you've pulled out of nowhere, and which are, well, they're your opinion, but they're fine, but they're not supported by any evidence, because we've seen, and it's not me saying this, you look at things like the Israeli security think tanks like INSS and others, they say what I've just said to you, that it didn't work, the attempt to foster. And he's welcome to go to land at Tehran by helicopter or somewhere and to go and look for the protesters. I mean, he'll get a sharp shock when he looks for them. There's no organized opposition there to arm. And how would he get the arms in? It reminds me of a story I remember during the Libya fight. And this is not about America, but it was with the British trying to do the same thing, overthrow Gaddafi. And then they landed a helicopter with some special forces in it, and they landed there, and people sort of gathered around looking at them, and they kept saying they had an interpreter, and they said, well, where's the opposition? Where's the opposition? And everyone said, oh, what are you talking about? And they were literally sort of going around, landing on the ground, saying, we have to find the opposition. Where's the opposition? Well, he's welcome to try in Tehran. Good luck to him.
And so just in the last few minutes we have here, where do you think we're going next? Because obviously we have all this firepower there. A lot of it continues to flow in. You have General McKenzie who's saying, maybe we won't, maybe we'll find a negotiated settlement of some sort. You have Admiral Winfield who says, yeah, I think that since nothing happened on Thursday, something this weekend could potentially happen. Where do you see this going?
Well, it's impossible to say because this lies in the minds of two men. I mean, first of all, Trump is the operational mind that has to give the orders, and that of Netanyahu, and those that sit around him, because Netanyahu has made it very clear. And I mean, one of the paradoxes to all that you've been saying to me is that in the meeting at Mar-a-Lago, the Israeli press, that was in the end of December, the New Year meetings, actually Netanyahu was arguing with Trump that the nuclear issue wasn't the issue at all. He said, no, forget it. I'm not going to come to you and say, they're sort of 5 weeks from a bomb. What I'm saying is the missiles are the problem. In fact, the missiles have changed everything because the missiles are becoming so sophisticated and elaborate that it makes nuclear weapons almost redundant, or certainly much less important to us. And what is worrying us is that they're not just restoring, if you like, their missile defenses. This is a completely new paradigm. And they have an umbrella that we will not be able to penetrate, even if we knew they were building a weapon, which we don't. If we knew that they were building, we wouldn't be able to penetrate it because they would be under this umbrella and we wouldn't be able to take military action against them. So, I mean, even then, he was making it clear that, to talk about, the threat of military weapons. We've heard this for 20 years. I mean, every year Netanyahu's been saying, how many times? You recall him going to the UN?
Yeah.
He's on the thing
the
saying
little bomb,
it's close to a bomb. Yeah, exactly. We've been hearing this year after year. But at Mar-a-Lago, he inverted it completely, selling to Trump and saying, put the missiles above the nuclear issue because nuclear issue is not so important. We want you to bomb the missile affairs. But as I say to you, look at the map. They are spread across 57 different command areas of Iran, which is the size of Western Europe. That's going to be quite a job, I think, to try and destroy. They're buried down in silos. They can't fire from silos, not from, some will be fired from mobile launchers, and mostly in the mountains, where they too are kept in tunnels, and they just come out of the tunnels and are quickly, within seconds, withdrawn back into tunnels. I don't think it'll be just an easy war if it's a war. And my feeling is that, first of all, I can't predict. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't predict, what way Trump will wake up one morning and
the psychiatrist is the
what Netanyahu will have said to him whispered in his ear in the previous night. But I would think, the momentum and the pressure on him. Imagine, this is a man who likes to win and to have winning stories, to make historic achievement. Pulling back a force like that is going to not be a win. I'd finally say, actually, I believe that Mr. Trump is very much trapped. He would like to have an achievement in Iran, but equally, he knows that if he goes to a long, big war against Iran, if he has no option but to go to a big war in Iran, this could be the end of his presidency, that he would be ending his presidency at the midterm elections. So he has an absolute trap. So predicting which way he will come out, maybe he will just try and pretend something in the negotiations wasn't what we thought it was, but it's actually a huge achievement. This is a great victory for us. He might try to do that. I don't think it'll work. It won't be very persuasive to people, but he may try that. But otherwise, he's got all these forces there. The momentum is for that. The Israelis are pressing hard on that, and their auxiliaries in the United States. And so, the chances, who knows? It might go one way or the other way. He's not a predictable person.
Val, you've really summed it up very well. That's all those things are at play. Every one of you could go any of those directions. Trump has done all of those before, so it's a roll of the dice to figure it out. The only thing we know is that, at least according to media reports this week, is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, has reportedly told Trump that there are huge risks to this, which he would certainly be, and his political advisors be talking about. Here's the consequences if it doesn't go that way. So let's hope that those political pressures and the loss of his prestige and the remainder of his time in term of office could be just completely destroyed by this. Let's hope that pressures him into it. And I will be the first one to cheer if he comes up with even some kind of a lame excuse of a negotiated settlement that prevents war and prevents all these deaths. I would be all for that. But as you say, we're going to have to wait and see how it's going to happen because nobody but Donald Trump knows.
Exactly.
But anyway, boy, we are so grateful to having you come on today with this really, really insightful and comprehensive understanding of the totality, both of the Iranian side, the American side, and the Israeli side. All of this is in a big mosaic put together to have an understanding, and you have really provided us that today. Really appreciate that. And of course, we recommend folks that, man, don't wait just until Ambassador, I'm sorry, you said you don't want me to call you Ambassador, former diplomat, Alistair Crook has on the Substack that you're seeing right there, conflictsforum.substack.com.
So that's the Democrats standing with the Republicans, many Democrats standing and cheering for the war in Iran. So why would they do that? Well, because they're owned by the same people, the same military-industrial complex, the same billionaires, the same shadow government that controls Donald Trump controls the Democrats. That's why. They all work for the WEF billionaires. New top Democrats are working behind the scenes to stop a vote on the Massey Iran War Powers Resolution, a vote that would force every member of Congress to go on the record over Trump's potential regime change war. So Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna, the same two guys who got the Epstein files released, they had to pass a law, and they still haven't released it. Only half of the files got released. So I don't know how they could do that without going to prison. Well, because you need somebody in the Department of Justice to take them to prison. And of course, Trump runs the Department of Justice right now. So there's no one there to prosecute them inside the government for breaking the law. So Massey and Khanna, they don't want to allow the president to unconstitutionally start another war. So they want to make it a law that they have to vote. The Congress has to take, because the Congress is the only one that has the ability to actually declare war, not the president. And so they want to make, but they've given that power away since 9/11 to the president. And now the president goes along and makes a war in Libya, anywhere he wants. Libya, the Sudan, Somalia, Syria, anywhere they want. Ukraine, well, Venezuela, Cuba, anywhere they want, they make a war. Okay. And so Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna want to make it that the Congress actually has to do their job and declare a war or not. They want to vote on a war. And the Democrats are blocking it. House Foreign Affairs Committee Democrats have been working behind the scenes to try to prevent a vote. Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey's Iran War Powers Resolution, a measure that would require every member of Congress to go on the record about a potential U.S. war with Iran. So, hey, I'm not saying everyone that was, you know, when all the Democrats that were standing or everybody that was standing for war in Iran, I'm not saying that everyone there is a PDF file. I'm just saying that they know that they're sitting right next to a PDF file and they don't do anything about it. And if the ones in charge tell them that they should go to war or be exposed, they will choose getting rid of the witnesses over admitting to the crime. The shortest distance between 2 points is a financially struggling Democrat. Keep that in mind. Top Democrat HFAC staffer, multiple sources with direct knowledge tell me deliberately inflated projections of opposition to the bipartisan measure, warning of 20 to 40 Democratic defections as part of a broader effort to dampen momentum and prevent the Iran War Powers vote from advancing. Khanna and Massey had initially planned to force a vote on the resolution this week, but Democratic leadership is now saying they expect the vote to be delayed until next week or even later. Oh, chagrin. I bet they're super upset about that. The postponement comes as the Trump administration accelerates preparations for unauthorized military action, overseeing the largest U.S. military buildup in the region in years. Khanna and Massey argue that Congress must weigh in before, not after, the U.S. is pulled into another regime change war in the Middle East. Their resolution would require, so they want to delay this vote until after Trump goes to war.
Oh.
They want to delay this vote until the Israel or the CIA does a false flag and blames it on Iran. They want to wait. Their resolution would require explicit congressional authorization for any military action against Iran, a vote that could become one of the most consequential foreign policy decisions in recent congressional history. So, looks like somebody's a little behind the times there. We don't need approval to go to war these days. Israel is our Grok. They're our GPS, and it tells us where to turn. We'll be right back with more of this story after a brief message from our sponsor. Hey, you may have seen the conversation happening online lately. Censorship's back. A Democratic congressional staffer told me it's pretty clear Democratic leadership is working to delay or potentially sideline the vote on the Massey War Powers resolution. That's the leadership. That would be Jeffries in the House, and who's the guy in the Senate?
Schumer.
Chuck Schumer in the Senate. And they both work for Wall Street, which works for the military-industrial complex, which works for the deep state, which works for the shadow government, which works for the WEF, the international billionaires. If you've been around the Hill, this is a familiar playbook. Yes, this is a familiar playbook. Leadership rarely comes out and says they oppose these votes outright because they know the underlying issue is popular with the base, said the staffer who works on foreign policy. Instead, you see process concerns, timing objections, and caucus unity arguments used to slow things down or keep members off the record. We've seen the same approach on past war powers votes and foreign policy amendments that clash with the national security elite consensus. So if the national security elite consensus, meaning the deep state, the military-industrial complex, and the shadow government, if they want a war in Israel, then we get a war. It doesn't matter if it's not popular. It doesn't matter if having a vote on it is super popular with their base. You don't get what you want. This is not a democracy. This is an oligarchy, and you are fooled into thinking voting matters. The internal effort to sabotage momentum for the Iran War Powers resolution reflects a broader strategic calculation among Democratic elites. As a recent drop site report detailed, many top Democrats privately believe Iran will ultimately have to be confronted militarily. That's it. That's it. Nobody voted for this. Nobody voted for this. Nobody wants this. They spend all their money, time, and power trying to murder people and slaughter them in other countries instead of giving us health care, giving us good jobs, having our corporation, having our small businesses thrive, instead of investing in railroads and airports and streets and schools and hospitals here in the United States. They spend all their time and power doing the bidding of the military-industrial complex. That's why we have 1,000 military bases around the world. That's why Donald Trump wants to spend $1.5 trillion. We already spend 10 times more than the 10 countries combined next to us spend on their military. It's completely off the rails. Your national government, your federal government is completely out of control, off the rails. It's 100% corruption going right at you, and the people who have corrupted our government have corrupted your media too. And they've corrupted half the social media too. Why wouldn't they? But they also understand that openly backing another regime change war in the Middle East would be politically toxic. So they want a war, but they know that nobody in the country wants the war, the elites. So how do we get there? Well, false flag. That's how they get there. Poll after poll shows there is little to no appetite for war with Iran, including lukewarm support among conservatives. Even conservatives don't want it. The preferred outcome of many AIPAC-aligned Senate Democrats, according to a senior foreign policy aide to Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, is that Trump acts unilaterally, weakening Iran while absorbing the domestic backlash ahead of so they want this to be Trump's war. They don't want to have to take responsibility for it, but they don't want to have to step up and say they're for it. The war powers vote threatens to disrupt that arrangement by forcing Democrats to declare publicly on the record whether they support giving Trump unilateral authority to wage war. So that's America's just a baggage handler for the greater Israel project. We are the ones dragging their stuff around, and whatever we do and wherever we go, we're the ones doing the bidding, and we're the baggage handlers for Israel. And you don't want to know what your tip is. Guess what? There's the House Democrat. That's the leader. He's in the tank for AIPAC. Chuck Schumer in the tank for AIPAC. The Dems want a war with Iran, but they know the Dems base doesn't. They want a war with Iran in Trump's name, so they won't get blamed for supporting the regime change, which they fully and wholly do. The Dems are right-wing trash. I hate to put it in those terms because I know lots of right-wingers that they just said in this same article, most conservatives don't want this war. So, I mean, I just hate to refer to it as left-wing, right-wing. This is us against them. This is the oligarchs against everybody else. This is the neocons. This is the international globalists. This is the military-industrial complex. These are the people who control Donald Trump. Donald Trump doing the bidding. That's what this is. So okay. There you go. The Democrats just as horrible as the Republicans. It's all theater. What's that saying that I always say? Everything's fake. Everything's a what?
Lie. That's why I don't comply.
Yeah, everything's fake. Everything's a lie. Everything's a psyop. That's why I don't comply. And if you'd like to hear my jokes about this, come see me in San Antonio, Albuquerque, Houston, Dallas, Salt Lake City, and then we're in Los Angeles.
Multilateralism. There needs to be greater democracy in international relations. Power monopolization by a few countries is simply unpopular. We live in a multipolar world and need to practice true multilateralism. There needs to be greater democracy in international relations. Global affairs should be discussed by all, and the future of the world should be decided by all. We need to make sure that all countries abide by the same set of rules. The Global South is rising collectively. The global governance system should also stay up to date to give more prominence to their voices and representation.
The world today is experiencing a new Cold War, Cold War II, which the United States is waging against China. However, these two powerful countries have very different visions of international relations. The political model that Washington is trying to impose on the world is the exact opposite of the political model being advocated by Beijing. So today, we're going to compare two speeches given by the top diplomats of the US and Chinese governments. We're going to compare them back to back, and you can see how extremely different these proposals are. The Donald Trump administration wants to return to the colonial era of the 19th and early 20th centuries, when Western empires carved up the world and treated other regions as their imperial so-called spheres of influence, denying sovereignty to global South countries. On the other side, China, which has been a victim of colonialism and which is part of the global South, China wants to lift up the global South, opposing Western colonialism, and China advocates for a multipolar global order in which all countries, regardless of size, have a voice on the international stage and have representation in multilateral institutions, and in which their sovereignty is respected and guaranteed by a clearly established international law that every country must abide by. Whether or not it's a great power or a small country, all countries have to abide by the same rules.
We need to make sure that all countries abide by the same set of rules.
Again, this is the polar opposite of what the US government is advocating. Washington is saying that it wants the rule of the jungle, in which powerful countries do what they can and weak countries suffer what they must. This extreme imperialist worldview was articulated on CNN by Donald Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller.
The United States, this is sort of foundational.
The United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere. We're a superpower, and under President Trump, we are going to conduct ourselves as a superpower. It is absurd that we would allow a nation in our own backyard to become the supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us, to hoard weapons from our adversaries, to be able to be positioned as an asset against the United States rather than on behalf of the United States.
Sovereign countries shouldn't be able to do what they want to do.
The Monroe Doctrine and the Trump Doctrine is all about securing the national interests of America. The future of the free world, Jake, depends on America being able to assert ourselves and our interests without apology.
Now, it must be stressed that these are not just the fringe views of one individual. This is the ideology that is being promoted by all of the top officials of the U.S. government. And this was spelled out very clearly by the top U.S. foreign policy official, Marco Rubio, who is the U.S. Secretary of State and the second most powerful person in the U.S. government after Trump. And Rubio delivered a speech surrounded by European officials at the Munich Security Conference this February. And it was one of the most explicitly pro-colonialist speeches I have ever seen in the 21st century. The head of U.S. foreign policy was saying very clearly to the entire world that the U.S. empire wants to reverse the anti-colonial struggles. It wants to undo the decolonization we saw after World War II. And the U.S. empire wants to work together with the European empires to recolonize other parts of the world, to restore their empires. Marco Rubio did not hide it. He was very proud of that fact. Listen to how, in this clip from his speech, Rubio praises the European empires for colonizing the global South, especially the Americas. He speaks positively of the vast empires that extended across the globe, and Rubio complains that decolonization led to the decline of Western global dominance.
Hi, kids. Remember your dreams? All the future plans you made?
For 5 centuries before the end of the Second World War, the West had been expanding. Its missionaries, its pilgrims, its soldiers, its explorers pouring out from its shores to cross oceans, settle new continents, build vast empires extending out across the globe. But in 1945, for the first time since the age of Columbus, it was contracting. The great Western empires had entered into terminal decline, accelerated by godless communist revolutions and by anti-colonial uprisings that would transform the world and drape the red hammer and sickle across vast swaths of the map in the years to come. Against that backdrop, then as now, many came to believe that the West's age of dominance had come to an end. We in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history. And this is what President Trump and the United States want to do again now, together with you, to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history, to build a new Western century.
So the message is now clear. What is the goal of the U.S. empire? It is to reverse the decolonization that we saw in the second half of the 20th century, to drag the world back to the 19th century of colonialism. This was made very explicit by the second most powerful person in the U.S. government, Marco Rubio, who's not only the Secretary of State, but also the National Security Advisor for Trump. And Rubio's pro-colonial diatribe could not have been any more different from the speech delivered by China's Foreign Minister, Wang Yi. The model of international relations that China is promoting is the polar opposite. China is trying to defend decolonization, and China is promoting a more multipolar world based on multilateralism and win-win cooperation and respect for the sovereignty of small countries. Again, I cannot emphasize this point enough. If you compare Rubio's speech and Wang Yi's speech, they are the exact opposite. The US wants to bring back colonialism and Western hegemony, and China wants to oppose imperialism because China has been a victim of imperialism. During the century of humiliation from 1839 until the revolution in 1949, China was partially colonized by numerous Western powers and Japan. China was invaded many times by the Western powers and Japan. And China has done everything it can since the revolution in 1949 to defend its sovereignty and to resist imperialism and Western and Japanese hegemony. And I want to briefly look at the highlights of the speech that China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave, so you can see for yourself what I mean.
Power monopolization by a few countries is simply unpopular. We live in a multipolar world and need to practice true multilateralism. There needs to be greater democracy in international relations. Global affairs should be discussed by all, and the future of the world should be decided by all. We need to make sure that all countries abide by the same set of rules, i.e. the basic norms governing international relations underpinned by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. All countries should be equal in terms of rights, opportunities, and rules, and all countries, in particular small and medium-sized ones, should be able to find their places and play their roles in international relations. To practice multilateralism, major countries in particular should lead by example. They should take the lead in advancing cooperation instead of conflict or confrontation. They should take the lead in observing rules instead of applying double standards. They should take the lead in promoting equality instead of imposing their will onto others. They should take the lead in encouraging openness instead of resorting to self-serving unilateralism.
Wang Yi initiated the speech warning that we are seeing the law of the jungle and unilateralism have gone rampant, which is a clear reference to the US empire invading Venezuela, bombing Iran, colonizing Palestine.
Over the past year, the international landscape was marked by growing transformation and turbulence, and the law of the jungle and unilateralism went rampant. Humanity has come to a new crossroads for the cause of peace and development.
And China emphasized that this is why President Xi Jinping created the Global Governance Initiative in order to reform global governance institutions based on 5 principles: sovereign equality, international rule of law, multilateralism, a people-centered approach, and real tangible action in order to build a more just and equitable global governance system. And in order to do this, China emphasizes that we must revitalize the United Nations system, which it noted is rooted in the history of the fight against fascism and imperialism. China refers to World War II as the World Anti-Fascist War, and after it ended in 1945, the UN was created. China acknowledged the UN is not perfect. There are many problems with the UN, especially the fact that it is dominated by the US and the Western powers. However, China emphasized that the UN is important because it remains the most universal intergovernmental organization. In the UN, each country, regardless of its size or wealth, has a voice and a sacred vote, as well as obligations and equal rights. Without the UN, the world would revert to the law of the jungle, where the strong prey on the weak.
The priority is to revitalize the UN system. The founding of the UN is an important outcome of the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War. The UN is not perfect in its current form, but it remains the most universal and authoritative international and intergovernmental organization in the world. On the UN platform, every country, regardless of its size or wealth, has a voice and a sacred vote, as well as its due obligations and equal rights. Without the UN, the world would revert to the law of the jungle, where the strong prey on the weak, and many medium and small-sized countries would lose the multilateral foundation, critical to their survival and development.
And this is very important. China emphasized multiple times in this speech that even though China is a massive country with 1.4 billion people and the largest economy in the world measured at purchasing power parity, despite that, China wants to respect small and medium-sized countries and ensure that the global South also has equal representation in the United Nations. And Wang Yi emphasized the problem is not the international system itself. The problem is not the United Nations, but rather a certain country, he said. And we all know what that certain country is. It's the United States. He noted that the United States is destroying the United Nations. The U.S. is seeking to magnify differences and disagreements, putting itself above everyone else, stoking bloc confrontation, and reviving the Cold War mentality. Now, China uses this phrase often. What they're saying is the U.S. is trying to drag the world back into a new Cold War. And I would say that we already are in a new Cold War. But China opposes that. And China says that instead of having unilateralism and imperialism in a new Cold War, China proposes win-win cooperation. And China says multilateralism should always be upheld.
The key lies in the collaboration and cooperation of all countries. The reason why the international system is not functioning well enough lies not with the UN itself, but rather with certain countries seeking to magnify differences and disagreements, put itself above everyone else, stoke bloc confrontation, and even revive the Cold War mentality. So all these have eroded the foundation of trust, worsened the atmosphere for cooperation, and impeded the functioning of international institutions. To safeguard international collaboration and cooperation, it is important to seek common ground while shelving differences and pursue win cooperation. There is no reason why countries cannot respect each other and contribute to each other's success.
And this is very important. China defends the UN Charter because the principles of the UN Charter are respect for sovereign equality and independence and non-interference. Every country is sovereign over its own territory and controls its own internal affairs, and other countries cannot carry out acts of aggression, which the US empire is constantly doing. China has not fought a war since 1979, whereas the US is waging war every single day somewhere around the world, usually multiple wars at the same time. So China is instead proposing another kind of foreign relations based on cooperation, not conflict and confrontation, based on equality, saying countries should not impose their will on others. And then Wang Yi emphasized that, quote, the global South is rising collectively.
The global South is rising collectively. The global governance system should also stay up to date to give more prominence to their voices and representation. Time will prove that the more democratic international relations are, the more peaceful the world is, the stronger multilateralism gets, the more effective global governance becomes.
So China's message is very clear. We should oppose imperialism. We should respect the sovereignty of the global South. We should democratize international institutions so the world is not a global dictatorship run by the US empire, which is what Washington wants. The US only joins organizations if it has veto power. The US has veto power in the UN Security Council. The US is the only country on earth with veto power in the IMF and the World Bank, which are based in Washington. The US has been basically destroying the World Trade Organization because it can't completely control it. Any organization the US empire can't control, it either withdraws or it tries to destroy that organization. So it is not in any way an exaggeration to say that the proposals that the US and China are making to the world are absolute opposites. They are the contrary of each other. The US empire wants to revive Western colonialism and unite the US and Europe by exploiting the rest of the world, the majority of the population that lives in the global South. That is the global majority, 86% of the world population. China, a global South country that was colonized for 100 years by the Western powers in Japan, China wants a new global order based on opposition to imperialism, based on multipolarity, true multilateralism, respect for sovereignty, and non-interference. And this is why it's obvious why so many countries in the global South are supporting China's vision and opposing the US empire's vision. And this is why the US empire has been resorting to extreme violence and wars and regime change and illegal sanctions to try to crush any country that stands up to US hegemony, like Venezuela and Cuba and Iran. This is the central contradiction in global politics today. If you understand that, you can understand most of what's happening in geopolitics today. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton.
Kofi, follow me.